At the beginning of Chapter 1, the main character was spending his day the same way he always did, playing a game. It was a perfectly ordinary and busy day for everyone around him, with nothing unusual happening at all. Then, without warning, his mobile screen displayed an error message about a network connection failure before sending him back to the title screen. A set of instructions appeared, telling him to put all of his stat points into evasion and to aim for a build centered around being an evasion healer, one that would completely overturn the common sense of another world. The next thing he knew, he found himself sitting on the floor with no memory of how he got there. When he looked up, he realized with great surprise that he was positioned directly in front of the throne. He had absolutely no idea where he was. Two other people were standing somewhere behind him. One of them, a boy, noticed that a girl nearby looked as though she was about to collapse and checked if she was all right. She told him she was fine and thanked him, then asked what was going on. The main character stared at the two of them with wide eyes, beginning to wonder whether they, just like him, had been brought to this place without any warning or understanding of what had happened. The thought crossed his mind that he might have actually been summoned to another world, the kind of thing he had only ever seen in manga or games. Then the person sitting on the throne spoke. He welcomed the three of them, addressing them as brave heroes. The main character could hardly believe it. He thought to himself that this had to be one of the most overused situations found in games. The man on the throne introduced himself as the king of the kingdom, Joseph Roa Piznut. He explained that his kingdom, the Piznut Kingdom, was in a difficult situation because of how close it was located to the demon continent, a place where demon folks resided. Because of this, the king made a request for the three of them to go and defeat the demon lord on the kingdom's behalf. The main character observed the king and privately thought that he came across as quite arrogant, and that he did not look particularly troubled by the situation at all. A minister then stepped forward and offered to explain things more clearly. Before doing so, he first asked for each of their names. The main character gave his name as Sakurai. The girl introduced herself as Takana, and the other boy said his name was Watanabe. The minister responded with great excitement, expressing that the long-awaited moment of successfully summoning the heroes had finally come to pass. He went on to explain that the three of them were believed to have the potential to grow far stronger than ordinary people. He repeated what the king had already said about the kingdom's proximity to the demon continent and emphasized the urgency of them becoming powerful as quickly as possible in order to defeat the evil demon lord. Sakurai privately thought that the minister was treating them as though they were gullible, and he glanced over at the other two. He quietly felt relieved that neither Takana nor Watanabe seemed to be the kind of person who would get emotionally swept up and immediately sympathize with the king's cause. The minister then instructed all three of them to bring out something called a status plate so that their abilities could be checked. None of them had any idea what that was, and they exchanged confused looks with one another. The minister seemed to catch himself and apologized for assuming they would already know, then asked whether they had never seen a status plate before. He then said a short chant out loud, and a hologram appeared in front of him. He explained that by saying the right words, a person could see their current condition displayed in that form. Sakurai thought to himself that this world operated similarly to a game, and he felt the excitement of a lifelong gamer stirring inside him. He said the chant himself, and a hologram box appeared before him. The other two looked surprised at what had materialized, then quickly tried the chant themselves. Looking at his own status, Sakurai saw that he was at level 1. His job was listed as priest. Every one of his primary stats, attack, defense, accuracy, magic, and evasion, was at just 1 point each. His recovery stat, however, was at 100. He had 3 skills, a passive one called language acquisition, along with the abilities to heal and to regenerate. It was clearly a support-oriented type of job and a noticeably unbalanced build, at least by any standard he was familiar with. He then realized that the language acquisition skill was almost certainly the reason why he was able to communicate with people in this world without any difficulty. The other 2 skills, heal and regenerate, both struck him as genuinely useful. The fact that his job was priest meant that he was essentially a healer by role. The minister reacted with great enthusiasm upon learning Sakurai's job, pointing out that priest was actually an advanced version of the healer job and that what made it so remarkable was its ability to cure any kind of injury, no matter how severe. Sakurai quietly noted to himself that he had mentioned healer out of habit alone, not realizing it was actually the base job that came before priest in this world system. He decided he would simply continue referring to his job as healer for the time being. Takana then announced that her job was wizard, which the minister praised as an advanced form of the magician job. When Watanabe revealed his own job, the minister and everyone else in the room reacted with visible shock. Sakurai felt sorry for Watanabe, sensing that things were going to be complicated for him. Though he had to privately admit that out of the 3 of them, Watanabe was the one who actually looked the most like a traditional hero. The minister also made sure to tell them that as their levels increased, they would be able to raise their stats however they saw fit, and he urged them not to forget about that. Watanabe stared at his own status, quietly wondering aloud about the stat points already available to him. Sakurai noticed something on his own status screen as well, and was taken aback. The minister reacted with surprise when Watanabe mentioned having stat points already available, explaining that this was likely a gift from God, given Watanabe's status as the hero, since ordinarily a person had to level up before receiving any stat points to spend. Sakurai looked at his own screen and saw that he also had 50 stat points waiting to be used. He thought with glee that he could put them into attack, defense, magic, or recovery. The classic options one would expect from this kind of system. Curious, Sakurai asked the minister what the average stat values were for people in this world. The minister replied that most people's primary stats for their job tended to fall somewhere between 20 and 30. He added that if someone managed to push a stat past 50, they would be considered so formidable that no one would question them, even if they chose to declare themselves a top-tier master. Sakurai covered his mouth in surprise as he looked at his recovery stat, showing 100 points. In his mind, he thought about how if only 50 points was enough to be called a master, then having 100 points must make him incredibly powerful. He figured it was probably more than enough, even without raising it further, though he had not tested it yet to be completely sure. He then remembered an old wound he had gotten from a traffic accident when he was a child. That scar had bothered him so much over the years that he never wore short sleeves, even during summer. He decided it was the perfect opportunity to test his skill. He looked around, then touched his arm and felt a warm sensation spread through it. When he rubbed the area, the old wound had completely healed. He was amazed to discover that his healing ability could not only close fresh wounds, but also mend old injuries as well. Because of this, he decided there was no need to invest any more points into his recovery stat. This led him to think about how he should distribute his remaining stat points. He reflected on what was typically expected from a healer. The first priority was surviving. The second was maintaining good positioning on the battlefield. The third was having strong healing ability. Most people would normally think to raise their defense first, so they would not fall easily in battle. To Sakurai, nothing was worse than a healer who got targeted by enemies right away and died before being able to help their teammates. But simply building up defense did not feel like the right answer to him either. Even with high defense, he would still take some damage when hit, and that meant he might end up spending his healing on himself rather than on his allies. He clicked on the evasion stat and felt that he had found his answer. If he never got hit in the first place, he could focus entirely on supporting his companions without any distraction. It was a simple idea. It might have sounded unusual to others, but to Sakurai, this was what the ideal healer looked like. And the faster his teammates could defeat enemies, the faster the whole party could move forward. Takena asked if Sakurai had finished distributing his points. Sakurai told him he had put everything into evasion. The minister was completely shocked and asked him to repeat himself. The soldiers around them questioned whether they had heard correctly. One of them said that a healer should have put all points into recovery and wondered out loud if Sakurai was simply useless. The minister called Sakurai an idiot, saying that with a build like that he would not even be able to heal minor scratches and would be nothing but dead weight to the other two heroes. He demanded to know why Sakurai had not consulted him before making such a decision. Sakurai quietly thought to himself that 100 points in recovery should be more than fine. The king questioned whether Sakurai had any sense at all. He reminded everyone that being a healer was an extremely rare job. He then immediately ordered for Sakurai to be thrown into jail, declaring that such a useless fool was not even worthy of being called a hero. Takena tried to speak up for Sakurai, telling the king that it was not right, and that Sakurai must have had his own reasons for making that choice. The king sharply told Takena not to tell him what to do. Sakurai was brought to the jail shortly after. A guard shoved him inside, mocking him for being such a worthless healer and telling him he should just go and die. The guard then swung his fist at Sakurai, who was caught off guard but somehow managed to dodge it. The guard was confused. Sakurai himself was surprised as well. The guard grew angry and threw another punch. Sakurai saw it coming and dodged by dropping flat to the ground. The other guard questioned what his partner was doing. The first guard said he kept trying to hit Sakurai in the face but somehow could not land a single blow. The second guard told him to stop talking nonsense. Sakurai began to wonder if his incredible ability to dodge was a direct result of pouring all his stat points into evasion. The second guard then swung his leg at Sakurai, sneering about what a useless healer could possibly do anyway. But he missed as well. The two guards attacked one after another, both completely baffled by the fact that they could not land a single hit. The first guard asked what was going on with Sakurai. The second guard reminded himself that Sakurai was just a healer. Both of them grew frustrated and eventually walked off in disgust. Sakurai laughed to himself once they were gone, thinking it served them right. He wondered himself who was really the useless one now, considering two trained soldiers could not even land a hit on a healer. He then thought about the situation he was in. He was irritated that they had called him useless without even bothering to check his status plate first. But then he reconsidered and thought that given the kind of king this kingdom had, it was probably better to keep his true abilities hidden anyway. He started thinking about how to escape. At the same time, he doubted he would be able to move around freely even after escaping, since he had been summoned to such a troublesome place to begin with. He briefly thought about the other two heroes and what they might be going through, then let the thought go. For the time being, he decided to think about his future plans and continue testing his skills. He opened his status plate and looked through his abilities. He thought about using heal, but realized he would need to be injured first to use it on himself, and he had no desire to hurt himself on purpose. That was the whole point of going with an evasion build after all, to avoid getting hurt entirely. He let out a small chuckle at the thought. That left him with Regenerate to test. It was another well-known healing spell from classic role-playing games. He decided to cast it on himself. He made a motion with his hand and felt the same deep warmth that Heal had given him, though he was not sure yet how effective it was. He began casting it again and again, each time feeling like his entire body was being wrapped in a comfortable, soothing heat. It reminded him of the feeling of bathing in warm sand. He kept casting Regenerate repeatedly and noticed that he did not feel tired at all, nor did it seem like he was running out of mana. He assumed there had to be some kind of limit, but began to think that perhaps his mana pool was simply enormous. After all, if having 50 points in his stat was considered powerful in this world, then having 100 points might genuinely make him the greatest healer in all of humanity. He figured he would have no problems when it came to his healing abilities. If he were being completely honest with himself, though, he wished he had access to a wider variety of skills. But he was still at level 1, so there was probably a chance to gain more as he grew stronger in the future. He let out a yawn. The warmth from the continuous Regenerate spell was making him feel sleepy. He decided he would rest a little longer before making any move to escape. He closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep on the bed. The two other heroes made their way down the stairs that led to the jail cells. When Watanabe looked inside the cell, he was surprised that Sakurai was actually able to sleep in a place like that. Takana thought that Sakurai must have been very tired after everything that had happened to him. Watanabe agreed, letting out a sigh as he thought of Sakurai as someone who was really tough. Inside the cell, Sakurai scratched his tummy in his sleep before rubbing his eyes and slowly sitting up. He greeted the two of them good morning, and they greeted him back. Watanabe told Sakurai that the king had agreed to let him out of jail, so they would be leaving the place for the time being. Sakurai muttered something under his breath in surprise. He thought about how the two of them could have just left him behind for their own good, but they chose not to. He then told them it was nothing and thanked them. The three of them had been summoned into a completely different world, one where a level system similar to that of a role-playing game existed as something completely normal. As they walked down the hall, Watanabe checked on Sakurai and asked if he was doing all right. Sakurai said that he was fine. He glanced at the king's portrait on the wall and muttered to himself again. Watanabe guessed that it was a little unsettling to look at. Sakurai admitted that it honestly made him question the sanity of whoever had decorated the place. Watanabe laughed it off and suggested that they all sit down to talk about what they knew so far. He also told Sakurai to help himself to any of the fruits laid out, as many as he wanted. Sakurai thanked him. They had been summoned into that world for the purpose of defeating an evil demon lord, or at least that was what they had been told. According to the king, once the demon lord was defeated, they would be sent back home to the exact time and place where they had originally been, as if nothing had ever happened. Sakurai found that explanation a little too vague to simply accept. Takana shared his doubt, pointing out that the king and his people were living in comfort while trusting a group of complete strangers with such an important mission. Watanabe agreed, adding that even if they did manage to defeat the demon lord someday, there was a real chance the king would not hold up his end of the deal and send them home. Sakurai let out a sigh of relief. He had been genuinely worried that the other two might have actually believed the shady king story. Watanabe chuckled and reached his hand out toward the others. The three of them joined hands together. Sakurai felt relieved knowing that the other two were truly on his side. Watanabe told them to just call him Rin from that point on. Takana said she would be very happy if they called her by her given name, Ruri. Sakurai checked with them to make sure they were comfortable with that, and told them they could call him Hiroki in return. Hiroki thought to himself about the idea of having real comrades. He had experienced that kind of bond inside games before, but it was his very first time having it in real life. He hoped they would all get along well. Rin shared his thoughts on their situation. Even though they could not trust the people of that kingdom, he still believed it was better for them to keep their connection with the country. His reasoning was that if the kingdom had a way to summon them from their world, then there was likely a clue somewhere within it about how to get back. Ruri, on the other hand, mentioned that she was more curious about the other races that existed in that world. She explained what she had heard. The people of that world could roughly be divided into 3 races. The place they were currently in was called the Piznut Kingdom, located on a continent called Loquat, which was home to humans. Beyond that, there was the Apricot Continent, where the demon folks lived, and the Tangerine Continent, which was home to the beast folks. There was also a common saying in that world that suggested one should go to the demon folks for magic, the beast folks for martial arts, and the humans for wisdom. Ruri believed that was the reason why humans had such a strong advantage when it came to knowledge about skills. Rin pointed out, however, that going directly to meet the other races could be dangerous, which was why they were thinking of holding back and watching how things unfolded for the time being. Hiroki agreed that it was a smart move. Still, he could not shake the thought that there might be clues to be found on the other continents as well, especially on the Apricot Continent where the demon folks, who were skilled in magic, made their home. He found himself quietly wondering what the best move would be for all of them. Hiroki asked whether the king had already explained the skill system to them. They confirmed that he had. Rin laid out what they had learned. There were 3 kinds of skills that existed in that world. The first was the passive skill, which stayed active at all times without needing to be triggered, just like the language acquisition skill they all had upon arrival. The second was the weapon skill, which was activated by equipping a certain weapon or piece of armor, and its effectiveness depended on a person's attack and defense stats. The skills that Rin and the others had fell under this type. The third was the magic skill, which let a person draw on the mana within their body and release it outward as magic. Ruri's and Hiroki's skills were examples of this type, and their effectiveness was tied to a person's magic and recovery stats. Hiroki took it all in and concluded that becoming a jack of all trades was not going to be simple. At the same time, it was now clear to him that gathering information from the human side of things was something they had to do. But he also could not let go of the feeling that there might be important clues waiting in other kingdoms as well. He quietly struggled with how to bring that up to the others. Before he could figure it out, Rin called his attention. Rin told him that both he and Ruri had been thinking of staying in the kingdom. Because of that, they wanted Hiroki to do something for them. Hiroki asked if Rin meant what he thought he meant. Rin hesitated and told him to forget it. But Hiroki stopped him. He told Rin that this was exactly what needed to be done, and that he had been thinking the very same thing himself. There was no reason for all three of them to stay in one place. So Hiroki decided he would be the one to go out and search for clues elsewhere on his own. Rin expressed concern and asked if Hiroki would be all right by himself. Hiroki was not worried. What he was working toward being was an evasion healer. After all, Rin was not familiar with the term. Ruri pointed out that Hiroki had in fact put all of his stat points into evasion, which Rin then remembered was the very reason Hiroki had ended up in jail in the first place. Ruri told Hiroki that she and Rin had distributed their stat points in the standard way that was common in that world. Hiroki said he understood, as it was more or less what he had expected. Ruri was a little surprised that he already knew that, and asked him why he had chosen to put all of his own points into evasion instead. Rather than explaining with words alone, Hiroki tossed an apple up into the air, and it came back down without hitting him at all. He used that to show them what maxing out evasion meant, that he would be able to avoid every single attack that an enemy threw at him. The other two were amazed by the demonstration. Rin said he now understood, and that it made Hiroki practically unbeatable. He was impressed that Hiroki had come up with something so clever. Hiroki shrugged it off, and said it was simply because he was a gamer at heart. Both Rin and Ruri bowed to him in respect. Rin told Hiroki that he could now see he was exactly the right person for the task ahead. It would be filled with danger, but he was placing his trust in Hiroki completely. Hiroki accepted without hesitation and told them to leave it to him. Inside, he admitted to himself that he was a little nervous about what would happen once he stepped outside the castle walls. But more than that nervousness, he felt a deep excitement at the thought of exploring another world with his own two eyes. He thought to himself that being a gamer at his core really was a troublesome thing. Hiroki then brought up the fact that he was surprised the king had agreed to let him out of jail. At that, Rin gently held Hiroki's wrist. He told Hiroki honestly that he had not really wanted to bring it up, but he felt he could not hide anything from his comrade. Rin then showed Hiroki a bangle on his wrist and explained that it was a contract bangle. The king had agreed to let all three of them move around freely, but only on the condition that Rin wore it. Hiroki reacted with alarm. He pointed out that with that bangle on, Rin was not truly free at all, and demanded to know what kind of contract the king had forced on him. Ruri struggled to find the right words. Rin tried to downplay it, saying it was not too serious, that he simply could not travel to other kingdoms without the king's permission. Hiroki cursed under his breath. In his mind, he was furious that the king had the nerve to treat a summoned hero like a pet on a leash. But more than his anger at the king, he blamed himself. None of it would have happened if he had not acted so rashly before. He bowed his head to Rin, not quite as an apology, but as a quiet acknowledgement of his own fault. He told Rin to wait for him, because he was going to find a way to get that bangle off of him no matter what. Rin was moved and surprised by that. Ruri added her own voice to it, reminding Rin that he also still had her searching for a way from within the kingdom. Rin said he was truly glad that the two of them had been summoned into that world alongside him. Hiroki then shifted the conversation to something practical. They needed a way to contact each other. He suggested they use their given names when reaching out, since the king only knew their family names and nothing more. Rin agreed, noting that they had never given the king their full names at the time of the summoning. They made it a rule among themselves that any contact using their family names should immediately be treated as a trap. Before Hiroki left, Ruri handed him a bag. Rin told him to take their personal belongings with him as well, so that he could trade them for money whenever he needed it. Rin gave him his ball pen and notebook, and Ruri gave him her hand mirror and handkerchief. Hiroki thanked them both and promised to bring back good news. Rin told him to be careful out there, and with that, Hiroki walked outside. Standing at the exit and looking out at the scenery, Hiroki thought it looked very much like the Middle Ages back on Earth. It genuinely felt like he had stepped straight into a classic role-playing game. He noticed, however, that evening was already setting in, which meant he needed to find Nin soon. But before that, he had to get his hands on some money, and he also needed to gather information. He began wondering where he could find a place to trade his items. He also thought carefully about what he was actually willing to sell. If he could help it, he did not want to part with the things that Rin and Ruri had entrusted to him. He also knew that the battery on his smartphone and his portable charger would run out eventually, which added another layer of worry. He remembered that he had 3 bite-sized chocolates on him, though with only 3 pieces, he was not sure if anyone would even bother buying them. He looked around at the stalls nearby and thought that it might be possible to make use of one of them somehow, but he still needed more information before he could do anything. He found himself wondering whether guilds existed in that world the same way they did in role-playing games, places like pubs or bars where adventurers gathered. As he thought all of this over, he began to notice people around him glancing at him repeatedly. It did not take long for him to realize that his clothes must have looked completely foreign to everyone around him, and he decided that getting new clothes had to become a priority as soon as possible. He thought about what kind of clothing he wanted. Healers and magicians usually wore robes, but he personally preferred something easier to move around in. He spotted a signboard nearby and tried to figure out where the guild might be from it. He opened up his stats to take a look, but noticed that only his status plate was written in Japanese. It seemed that the language acquisition skill they had been given did not apply to written text. He was frustrated. It felt like a dead end right from the very beginning, and he found himself on all fours on the ground in dismay. Someone nearby noticed him and asked if something was wrong. He explained that he did not know where the guild was located. A girl then asked him if he was lost. He was caught off guard. He had not expected to be treated like a lost child by someone who looked so young, and he felt a little embarrassed by it. The girl mentioned that she had also been separated from her friends, so, in a way, they were in the same situation. She happened to be heading to the Adventurers Guild herself. Hiroki asked if she was a magician. She confirmed that she was, and mentioned that she had just defeated a slime on her very first adventure earlier that day, and was on her way to collect her reward. Hiroki perked up at that. It meant that fighting was also a way to earn money in that world. He suggested that the two of them head to the Adventurers Guild together, and the girl agreed. Just then, someone in the distance began waving and calling out to the girl, whose name turned out to be Tina. A man up above was speaking to someone named Floyd, pointing down at Tina. Hiroki asked Tina if they were her friends, and she confirmed they were, calling back to Floyd and a person named Dea loudly. Dea, relieved, said they had all been very worried since she had suddenly disappeared. Dea then asked who Hiroki was. Tina answered simply that he was another lost child. Hiroki introduced himself to the group. Tina explained that Hiroki had been looking for the guild, and Floyd immediately suggested that they just bring him along. Floyd mentioned that he was an adventurer himself. Dea introduced himself as well, and Tina introduced herself properly to Hiroki, saying it was nice to meet him. They shook hands. Floyd pointed out the direction they needed to go, while Dea checked on Tina to make sure she was all right. Floyd then looked out ahead and told Hiroki to look up, pointing out a cluster of oddly shaped buildings in the distance. That, he said, was the Adventurers Guild, and it was hard to miss. Hiroki looked up at the building and asked to confirm that it was really the Adventurers Guild. Floyd said it was, and pointed out how sturdy it looked. He explained that it served as their headquarters in case of emergencies. He laughed and added that he could not quite say the same if a dragon ever broke through, though. That gave Hiroki pause for a moment. He asked whether monsters could actually get inside the city. Floyd assured him that nothing like that had happened in the last 100 years and invited him to head inside. Once they were in, Hiroki was completely amazed. Standing there, he thought to himself that he had truly arrived in every gamer's dream come to life. Floyd let him know that they were going to go report on their quest and asked Hiroki one more time if he was there to register. He pointed out the left counter and told Hiroki to head there, adding that he should call out if he needed anything. With that, Hiroki parted ways with the group. He was greeted by a woman named Hala, who asked how she could help him. Hiroki immediately noticed that she was a beast folk, her cat ears twitching as she spoke. He found it interesting that there was one living in a human kingdom. Hala seemed to notice his reaction and mentioned that it was fairly rare to see a beast folk around those parts before quickly clarifying that she was only a half. Hiroki apologized for catching her off guard with his staring, and she told him it was fine. Hiroki introduced himself and told her he was there to become an adventurer. Since he was registering, Hala went ahead and explained the details to him. She told him that the Adventurers Guild was a neutral power that operated across all 3 continents, open to all races. It had members from every race, demon folks, beast folks, and humans alike. Hiroki was a little surprised and asked if that included demon folk adventurers too. Hala confirmed it. She explained that with the never-ending monster attacks, every country needed as many adventurers as they could get. Because of that, it was actually possible to cross the borders of any country simply by showing an adventurer's identification. Hiroki found that very convenient. Hala continued, telling him that once he registered, he would be able to take on as many quests as he liked by picking them up from the board on the wall. Hiroki admitted honestly that he was not able to read the language in written form. Hala told him not to worry about it, as he could simply ask for recommendations at the counter just like other adventurers did. She then gave him an important warning. He needed to be very careful about which quests he chose, because there had been more than a few people who lost their lives by taking on more than they could handle. Hiroki took that seriously. He reminded himself that no matter how similar this world felt to a game, it would all be over for him the moment he died. Hala finished her explanation and asked if he was ready to register. He said yes. She handed him a form to fill out and told him the registration fee would be 3,000 lot. Hiroki was shocked. He had not expected it to cost anything. Hala, remembering that he could not read, offered to write the form out for him instead. Hiroki's mind worked quickly. He realized this was not going to be as easy as he had imagined, and he needed to come up with an excuse. He told her that he had just left his village and had not brought any money with him, and asked if it would be possible to sell some of his belongings instead to cover the cost. Hala said that would be fine, as the guild was happy to buy things from him, and asked what he had to offer. Hiroki reached into his bag and pulled out the 3 bite-sized chocolates. Hala examined them, noting that the packaging was very colorful and unlike anything she had seen before. Hiroki told her they were a rare sweet called chocolate. Hala apologized and said it would be difficult to assess their value without knowing what they were. Hiroki offered to let her try one. He made a simple deal with her. If she liked it, he would give her the remaining pieces in exchange for her covering his registration fee. But if she did not like it, he would not make her pay for the one she had already eaten. Hala thought about it and decided that one piece could not hurt. She sniffed it first, remarking that she had never smelled anything like it before, and then ate it. She trembled slightly. She told him it was really good. Hiroki was glad she enjoyed it. She described how it had melted the moment it touched her mouth, and how it had a bitterness to it that was also somehow sweet at the same time. She agreed to the deal and told him she would cover his registration fee in exchange for the rest of the chocolates. Hiroki thanked her warmly for her business. Hala then moved on to asking about his job and fighting style. He told her he was a healer and that he had put most of his stat points into recovery and evasion. Hala paused at that and quietly repeated the word evasion to herself as if she could not quite believe it. He confirmed it and told her not to worry, as he had also put some points into recovery. Hala summarized what she had just heard, a healer who had placed a significant number of valuable stat points into evasion. She then asked whether he was part of a party. Hiroki said no, he was on his own, and that finding comrades was actually one of the reasons he had come to the guild in the first place. Hala understood, but gently told him that she was afraid it would be very difficult to find a party willing to take him in. Hiroki was puzzled by that. She explained that healers who had raised stats other than recovery were simply not as effective at healing, and that was something widely known among adventurers. To put plainly, a healer like that was not considered useful to a party. Hiroki still believed that the evasion healer build was the best one he could have come up with. Hala suggested that he might want to reconsider before it was too late. But Hiroki held firm and said he still wanted to register. He asked if it would be all right for him to approach other adventurers directly and asked to join their party himself. Hala said that was perfectly fine. Hiroki thanked her, and she wished him good luck as he stepped away from the counter. He muttered to himself that he wanted to travel all around that world as fast as possible, which meant he needed to find a strong party. He looked around the guild and spotted a group that seemed promising, then walked over to them. He introduced himself and told them he was looking for a party to join, offering his services as a healer. One of them commented that having a healer was a rare thing. Looking at their reactions, Hiroki could tell they seemed interested. It was not really surprising to him. Healers were in high demand just about everywhere. The man in the group said it would be great to have one, and asked Hiroki if he had any prior experience in fighting or being part of a party. Hiroki admitted that he did not, but quickly told them not to worry, because he had no intention of making them protect him. The man was confused by what Hiroki meant by that. Hiroki told them that his evasion stats were quite high, so he was confident that enemy attacks would not be able to hit him. The entire group was stunned when they heard about his focus on the evasion skill. The man apologized and told Hiroki that he did not think he would be able to join their party. The others agreed with him. Hiroki was left standing there in disbelief. He thought to himself that if only they could understand even a little bit of what made evasion so great. But there was nothing he could do about it. He would just have to find another party. He made his way over to another table where a different group of adventurers was sitting. He introduced himself as a healer who was looking to join a party. The man in armor at the table was visibly excited to hear that Hiroki was a healer. The woman in the group mentioned that their party was made up entirely of frontline fighters. Hiroki thought to himself that this was another great reception. The woman asked what skills he could use and mentioned that it would also be helpful if he had a shield. Hiroki's heart sank a little. He did not have one. He told them that since he was still new, he only had healing and recovery skills for the time being. He was anxious that they might change their minds. The man in armor thought it over and said that as long as Hiroki had a healing skill, that should be enough, though they would need to rethink their formation a little to make it work. Hiroki told him that would not be a problem at all, and went ahead to explain what it meant to be an evasion healer. He told them that since no attack could harm him, there was no need for anyone to protect him, and that even if he somehow got hurt, he could heal himself without troubling anyone else. But despite that explanation, the man in armor stood up and apologized, telling Hiroki to try his luck elsewhere. He gathered his party and told them they were leaving. The woman remarked as she walked away that they could not afford to have another deadweight in the party. Hiroki noticed that the elf girl in the group glanced over at the woman when she said that, then quietly looked back down. He observed that the elf girl was carrying a very large and heavy piece of luggage, quite a lot for someone who appeared to be an archer. He began to wonder whether it was actually the elf girl the woman had been calling a deadweight. Thinking about it more, though, he realized that being used as a luggage carrier within a party might not actually be such a bad arrangement. Then it hit him that he was not particularly strong himself in terms of raw power. He felt genuinely confident in his ability to stay out of harm's way, but that was about the extent of it. He looked around the guild for another party to approach. Everyone nearby seemed to avoid meeting his eyes. He looked at the empty table in front of him and stood there in complete silence. He thought to himself that was how it was going to be. There was nothing he could do about it. Hala called out to him from the counter, telling him he could still cancel his registration if he wanted to. He walked back over to her and asked where he could find monsters. Hala told him they could be encountered outside the town or in dungeons, and asked why he was asking. Hiroki said he understood and asked where the nearest dungeon was. He also asked if she could recommend some quests that did not involve defeating monsters inside a dungeon, if possible. Hala said there were several quests she could suggest, but she was hesitant. She asked him whether he was actually planning to go to the nearest dungeon all by himself, pointing out that it was far too dangerous. She warned him that there were very powerful creatures called boss monsters lurking inside dungeons. Hiroki told her not to worry, saying he would just take a quick look and nothing more. She started to argue against it, but he assured her it would be fine. She pressed her palm to her face and sighed before telling him there was one quest that should be safe enough for a beginner. There was a dungeon nearby called the Stone Dungeon, and the quest she had in mind involved gathering herbs from that area. The guild would buy all the herbs he collected, and the quest had no time limit. Hiroki was happy with that and accepted it right away. Hala added one last warning. Even though it was possible to complete the quest without getting into any fights, there was still a chance the monsters inside might come after him. He told her he would be fine and headed out. She called after him to be careful. As he walked outside, he had not realized how close the sun was to setting. Under normal circumstances, he would have called it a day at that point. But he was in desperate need of money, so he decided to head to the dungeon and gather the herbs right then and there. He planned to use whatever money he earned from the quest to rent a room for the night. On top of that, he had slept quite a lot during his time in jail, so he figured that pulling an all-nighter for one night would not be too much of a problem. When he arrived, he recognized the stone dungeon and stepped inside. It did not seem like anyone else was there. He decided to simply push forward and see what was ahead. Looking around, he thought to himself that there really was no other word for a place like this other than a dungeon. It was surprisingly well lit inside, though he had not come across any monsters yet. He figured he would probably encounter some if he went deeper in. He recalled Hala's warning about people losing their lives by taking on more than they could handle. He looked at the notebook that Ron had given him and decided that, since he did not think coming back to life was an option in that world, he had better start drawing a map of the place to keep himself from getting lost. Just then, a slime came jiggling toward him, wobbling as it moved. It launched an attack at him, but it missed completely. Hiroki watched it bounce right past him and thought to himself that it was actually kind of cute. The slime kept trying to hit him again and again, but every single attempt failed. Hiroki started laughing. He thought to himself that this was way too easy and celebrated his evasion healer build under his breath. A slime was about as weak as enemies came, so he figured he should be able to defeat one on his own, even without a weapon. He decided to give it a try and swung his foot forward to kick the slime. Nothing happened. There was no damage at all. He then remembered that he had only put a single point into attack in his stats. He looked at the slime and thought that he should be able to defeat it easily enough, and told himself he really needed to pay more attention to his stat values going forward. After thinking it over, he gave up on trying to defeat the slime for the time being and wondered whether it would just keep following him until it managed to land a hit. He laughed again when he noticed the slime had somehow split into two. He figured it would be fine to just leave them alone, as he doubted they would get in his way while he gathered herbs. By the time a third slime had appeared, he was already ignoring them entirely. As he walked further in, he muttered to himself about everything he needed money for: lodging, new clothes, and all the other basics he had yet to sort out. It was becoming clear that he needed a lot of money even before his real adventure could properly begin. That meant he was going to have to gather a very large amount of herbs if he wanted it to be enough. At the start of Chapter 4, the slimes continued launching attacks at Hiroki one after another, but every single one of them missed. Hiroki kept walking without much thought. He realized at some point that his body had been dodging all of their attacks completely on its own, without him even noticing they were coming at him. It was only then that he became aware they had been attacking him at all. He eventually found a staircase leading further down, and when he looked back, there was already a large crowd of slimes trailing behind him. They all stopped at the edge of the floor and went no further. Hiroki wondered aloud whether they were unable to leave their own floor. If monsters were restricted to the floor they were on, then things were going to be much easier than he had expected. He decided to simply keep going deeper for as long as his evasion skill could carry him. On the second floor underground, he was attacked by mice, but as had become the pattern, every attack missed him. On the third floor, a wolf came at him, and just like everything else before it, the wolf missed entirely. He muttered to himself that it was all easy. By the 8th floor underground, monsters had started appearing in mixed groups. He noticed a plant nearby and wondered if it was the herb that Hala had told him about. He recalled her mentioning that there were two kinds of herbs that grew in the dungeon near the town, the first being the ordinary soothing grass, and the second being the higher-grade healing grass. He told himself it was time to start collecting the soothing grass. A wolf attacked him as he moved toward the plants, but it missed. He noted to himself that the higher-grade herb did not seem to grow on that floor, and decided to move on. The wolf was left sliding down the wall, behind him, in what seemed like sheer frustration. He made his way down to the 10th floor underground, and immediately noticed that the space felt more grand and open than the floors above. It seemed like there would be more to find there. And as if on cue, he came across a large patch of healing herbs, and there were plenty of them. He felt incredibly lucky. But just then, he heard something nearby. He tried to figure out what it was and thought carefully about what he should do. He weighed the options of running away against trusting his evasion ability and pressing forward. He decided he could not run from it. At the same time, he told himself to stay careful. If he got hit even once, he would run with everything he had. But until that happened, he would keep moving forward. He peeked around the corner of a wall and was immediately shocked by what he saw. The monster in front of him was clearly on a completely different level from anything he had faced so far. It looked like a bear, a horn bear, to be more precise. The sight of it terrified him, but he had already made his decision, and so he stepped forward. The bear looked at him, and Hiroki ran toward it. He told himself it was now or never. The bear let out a loud growl, and Hiroki froze in place. He reminded himself that this was exactly the kind of moment he had prepared for ever since he had chosen evasion as his path. The horned bear roared and swung its claws at him. Hiroki squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for impact. But the attack missed. The bear swiped again and missed. It charged at him and missed again. The bear stared at its own claws in visible confusion. Hiroki had not expected it to be this straightforward. He had not even imagined it could be this easy. He turned and began walking, gathering herbs as he went while the bear continued attacking uselessly at the air behind him. He thought about the value of what he was collecting. A bundle of 3 healing herbs was worth 1,000 lot, and realized he was going to make quite a good amount of money for what had turned out to be a very easy quest. He did acknowledge to himself, though, that things would probably be very different if he ever tried to fight the horned bear face to face. After some time, he counted what he had gathered and muttered to himself that he had reached about 20 bundles, which should be more than enough to rent a room. He let out a sigh of relief. When he looked up, however, he found that 5 bears had gathered around him. Despite all of them swinging and charging at him and missing every time, the situation was still genuinely nerve-wracking. His heart was pounding even as he knew logically that none of them could touch him. Then he noticed something, a door. He wondered whether it led to a treasure room or a boss room. He had been about to head back to the guild, but he reminded himself of the decision he had already made. He would keep advancing until he actually got hit. He cursed under his breath when he noticed the horned bears kept aiming straight for his head. He had been fine against 5 of them, so he reasoned that he ought to be fine against the dungeon boss as well. He sprinted to the door, muttered a brief apology as he pushed it open, and stepped inside. What he saw made his jaw drop. The room made it immediately and unmistakably clear that it was a boss room. Inside was an orc. The orc charged at him immediately. Hiroki knew that orcs usually appeared as early game enemies, but facing one as an actual dungeon boss was still terrifying. As it charged toward him, Hiroki desperately wished someone would hand him a weapon. He was scared, but when the attack finally came, it missed him completely. The orc stopped and looked at him in surprise. Hiroki smirked. He taunted the orc, telling it the match was already over. The orc roared and launched into a frenzied series of attacks. Hiroki whistled casually and told the orc it would need another 100 years of practice before it could beat him. He walked forward with confidence, though he quietly admitted to himself that he was not exactly winning either. He noticed an opening in the room and wondered if it was a passage leading further in. He walked through it and laughed when he looked back to see the orc had gotten stuck trying to follow him. He thought to himself that it must be completely unthinkable in that world to pass through a boss room without actually defeating the boss. When he reached the door at the other end, he found it was not even locked. He thought it was rather careless of whoever was responsible for that. Inside the room was a treasure chest and a glowing magic circle on the floor. Hiroki figured the magic circle was a teleportation gate and felt a spark of excitement. He turned his attention to the small wooden chest and told himself it made sense that the chest would be modest. It was, after all, an easy dungeon. He opened it and found a book inside. He wondered for a moment if it might be a magic grimoire, then reconsidered and thought it might be an adventurer's record of some kind. But when he opened it, it was completely blank. He checked it again to be sure. It was indeed blank. He scrunched his face in disbelief and felt deeply cheated. He shouted at the empty room, demanding his expectations back. Then a thought occurred to him. This was another world, after all. Was it possible that the book had some special way of being read that he did not yet know about? In some games, certain items could only be used or understood after collecting specific things first. He could not think of an answer right away. He put the book in his bag and decided to hold on to it for the time being. He then turned his attention back to the magic circle and tried to decide whether to step into it or head back the way he came. He questioned whether it was actually a teleportation gate or some kind of trap. A pop-up box appeared in front of him, asking whether he wanted to enter the magic circle. He chose yes, telling himself that there was nothing to be gained without taking risks. He stepped onto it. The magic circle lit up beneath him, and then he was gone. When he reappeared, there were people all around him. He looked around and recognized that he was back at the dungeon entrance. He also noticed, with some surprise, that it was already morning. He let out a chuckle. He was genuinely amazed. His hands trembled slightly from the excitement of it all. He decided to head straight back to the guild and show them everything he had gathered. Behind him, the man in armor from earlier called out to someone named Lusha, who turned out to be the elf girl from before, the one who had been carrying all the luggage. She hurried along behind the man. Hiroki continued walking ahead, noticing how many people were gathered outside the dungeon entrance, ranging from what appeared to be complete beginners all the way to seasoned veterans. Lusha, still struggling under the weight of the luggage, called back that she was coming. Meanwhile, Hiroki walked on, humming quietly to himself. He thought that while it had been a bit more exhausting than staying up all night playing a game back home, the feeling of excitement was something else entirely, something no game had ever quite matched. When he arrived at the Adventurers Guild, Hala noticed him right away and greeted him with visible relief, glad to see that he had come back safely. She told him she was happy he had decided to give up on exploring the dungeon alone. Hiroki told her he had not given up on it all. Hala, confused, asked whether he had found a party to join somewhere along the way. He said, not exactly, and then placed all of his collected herbs on the counter in front of her. Hala stared at the pile, completely stunned by just how much he had brought back. Hala exclaimed in disbelief when she saw what Hiroki had brought back. She recognized that the herbs were healing grass, the kind that was extremely difficult to obtain, and not only that, but they were all in perfect condition, as though Hiroki had not fought a single battle the entire time. Hiroki thought to himself that that was precisely because he had not fought at all. Hala assumed that he must have found a really wonderful party to have pulled that off. When Hiroki told her he had gone alone and gathered everything using his evasion skill, she responded with a simple acknowledgement. But Hiroki could tell from her expression that she had not really understood what he meant at all. He quietly wondered to himself whether his approach was truly that unusual. A short while later, Hala finished counting everything and announced that he had brought back 20 bundles of healing grass and 10 bundles of soothing grass. She handed him his payment. Hiroki was thrilled inside. With that money, he could finally buy the things he needed. He then reached into his bag, remembering that he had something else he wanted to show her. Hala asked what it was. Hiroki explained that inside a treasure chest in the dungeon, he had found a book with nothing written in it at all, just blank pages throughout. Hala went completely still when he said that. He held it out for her to see, confirming that every page was indeed empty. He wondered to himself whether her stunned silence meant the item was essentially worthless garbage, and privately agreed that it probably was. But then Hala took the book in her hands and began to tremble. She told him it was a skill acquisition book. Hiroki was shocked. He asked if that meant he could actually gain new skills from it, even though the pages were blank. Hala explained that yes, the pages were blank, and that the brown cover indicated it was the least valuable type of skill book that existed. Even so, she told him it was worth 10,000 lots. Hiroki could hardly believe what he was hearing. He found himself torn between using the book and selling it for the money. Hala suggested that he use it, and deep down Hiroki agreed. The idea of gaining a new skill was far more appealing to him than the money. Hala then offered to walk him through how to use it. She explained that he first needed to place his hand on top of the book and then use one of the skills he already had. The book would absorb his mana and grant him a new skill in return. Hiroki understood and quietly chanted his heal skill. The book lit up in response, and Hala's eyes went wide. Hiroki had acquired the shield skill. He heard a voice flow through his mind as it happened, and the memory came back to him of the woman from the earlier party who had mentioned that things would be easier if he had a shield. He thought to himself that a shield skill would probably be very useful if he had a companion fighting alongside him, though he did not have any companions at the moment. Hala asked if he had successfully acquired a new skill, and he told her he had. She congratulated him warmly, and he thanked her. She told him that it seemed like he was on his way to becoming a truly remarkable adventurer. Even though he had spent all of the previous day trying and failing to join a party at the guild, he was already showing impressive growth. And then there were those chocolates, she added. Those have been something else entirely. She leaned in slightly and asked in a low voice just who exactly Hiroki was. He told her he was just an ordinary person from another country. Inside, though, he wanted to say that he was a companion of a hero who had been summoned into another world from a country called Japan. But of course, he could not say any of that there. He told Hala that it was time for him to get going and thanked her for everything she had done for him. She told him to come to her whenever he needed advice. As he stepped back outside, Hiroki reminded himself that there was something he wanted to do before heading to an inn to rest. Just then, a wonderful smell caught his attention. A man at a nearby stall called out to him cheerfully, inviting him to come and eat. The man was selling grilled skewers. Hiroki suddenly realized that he had spent the entire night in the dungeon without eating or drinking anything at all. He accepted the invitation without hesitation. The man told him each skewer was 300 lots, and Hiroki said he would take 3. He ate with great enthusiasm. He thought to himself that the simple seasoning of salt did a wonderful job of bringing out the natural flavor of the meat, and told the old vendor it was delicious. The vendor laughed happily and agreed. Looking out from where he was sitting, Hiroki was amazed by the sight in front of him. It looked just like a lively marketplace. He bought a cup of juice from another nearby stall for 300 lots, and the vendor reminded him to return the cup when he was done. He took his drink and found a place to sit down. It was a rare moment of stillness, and he let himself breathe. He looked around at the people passing by. Almost everyone he could see was human. He recalled Hala mentioning that there were not many beast folk in that area, which made sense given that they were in a kingdom built around humans. He found himself wondering whether other kingdoms had a more mixed population where different races lived and mingled together. Being in another world, he genuinely wanted to meet and get to know as many different kinds of people and species as possible. He wondered if there were noble elves somewhere out there too. That thought brought the carrier girl back to his mind. He realized that she had actually been an elf. Then a flicker of doubt passed through him. He was not entirely sure. He decided he would verify it if he happened to run into her again. Hiroki opened his status screen and noticed that his newly acquired shield skill was not visible there. He was curious about it and wanted to try it out somewhere nearby. He returned the cup to the Jew seller and started making his way around the marketplace. Another seller nearby commented on his clothing, saying it looked quite unusual. Hiroki explained that it was from his hometown, and as he said it, he reminded himself that buying new clothes was something he still needed to take care of. He asked the old woman running the stall if she had any casual clothes available. She picked something out for him, saying that with how young he looked, the particular piece would suit him well. Hiroki agreed to take it. Looking at the fabric more closely, he thought it felt a little thin, so he figured he could use it as something to wear around while resting. The old woman asked how everything was, and Hiroki added a backpack to his purchase as well. She told him the total came to 2,800 lots and thanked him for his business. He then headed outside the royal capital to test his new skill. A slime appeared nearby, which he thought was perfect. Slimes were small fry. The same as always, their round, bouncy bodies actually made him want to keep one as a pet. He chanted the shield skill, and suddenly a thin membrane of light appeared around his body. He told the slime they were going to find out what the shield could do together. The slime attacked. It missed just like always. It kept bouncing toward him and missing over and over again. Hiroki then realized the problem. Because he was so evasive, the attacks were not landing on him anyway, which meant there was no way to actually test whether the shield was doing anything. He muttered to himself that he had no idea when the shield would ever actually be useful. On top of that, he could not go back into town while glowing like that. And since the effect lasted indefinitely until an enemy managed to break through it, he would end up lying in bed later dimly lit and unable to sleep. He found the whole thing rather inconvenient and wondered if there were any stronger enemies nearby that might help him figure out the skill's actual effects. He wandered past some bushes and heard voices coming from behind them. He thought they might be novice adventurers and went a look. He recognized them immediately. It was Tina and Dea. Floyd did not seem to be anywhere around. He watched as Dea swung at a slime and missed, and Tina launched fire magic at one. From what he could see, it looked like a fairly tough fight for them. It seemed like they were working to raise their levels, though Hiroki was not entirely sure whether the amount of effort they were putting in was normal for this world or not. Then a slime attacked and landed a hit on Dea. Hiroki was startled. Another slime went after Tina. He told himself he should not get involved, but at the same moment, he instinctively activated his shield skill. The shield immediately extended to protect Tina. She was surprised by the sudden glow around her. Hiroki could see that it had worked. Dea shouted at Tina to attack, and Tina responded by chanting her fire spell. The slime was burned and defeated. Dea looked over at Tina and asked if she had been glowing just a moment ago. Hiroki quietly breathed a sigh of relief. He turned to leave before they could spot him, but Tina had already noticed him. Her face broke into a wide smile, and she called out his name. Hiroki walked over to them, scratching the back of his head. Tina exclaimed that he had saved them and thanked him warmly. Dea called out to him with equal excitement. Hiroki greeted them both. Dea told him to drop the formal way of speaking with them. Hiroki thought to himself that the feeling of having helped someone was something he was genuinely glad about. He asked if they were really sure about setting aside the formalities. Both Tina and Dea confirmed it. Hiroki agreed, though he admitted that it was a bit difficult for him to speak casually with people who were older than him. He told them they could call him Hiroki. Dea was puzzled by the mention of age and said they looked about the same to him. Dea said he was 15 years old, and Tina said she was 13. Hiroki told them he was 19. Both of them were shocked. Hiroki thought to himself that it was a recurring problem. People from other places always assumed he was younger than he actually was. Dea muttered in surprise that he had been sure they were the same age, especially since they were about the same height. Before the conversation could go any further, Dea suddenly shouted a warning at Hiroki. Hiroki was confused. Several slimes that had crept up behind him launched their attacks, and all of them missed. Tina shouted that there were 3 slimes behind him. Dea kept urging him to either run or defend himself. Hiroki calmly told them he was completely fine. They continued shouting as another slime charged at him, and that one missed too. Dea and Tina stared in disbelief, wondering out loud if the slimes were somehow the ones doing the dodging. Hiroki clarified that it was actually him who was evading. Dea looked closely and pointed out that Hiroki's body did seem to be swaying ever so slightly, and asked whether that really counted as evasion. Hiroki confirmed that it did, and mentioned that he had even managed to obtain a skill book simply by evading attacks. Dea said he could not make any sense of that at all. Hiroki then asked the two of them if they could help him deal with the slimes, since he did not have much firepower of his own, and it was starting to become a nuisance. Dea agreed right away. Hiroki thanked them, thinking to himself as he watched them move that having a party alongside him really did make a difference. He found himself wanting more and more to hurry up and form a proper party of his own. Together, the 3 of them finished off the remaining slimes. Hiroki was genuinely grateful to have run into them when he did, since dealing with the slimes on his own had been more of a nuisance than he had expected given his lack of attacking power. Dea brushed it off and said it was no trouble at all. Tina suddenly collapsed to the ground and apologized, explaining that she had completely run out of mana. Hiroki asked if she was all right and offered to heal her right away. Tina came back to her senses and assured him she was fine. She had not taken any damage at all thanks to a shield and was simply exhausted from having used up every last bit of her mana. Hiroki thought to himself that using too many skills or too much magic must drain a person physically. He told Tina they would rest there for a little while. He also mentioned that the shield skill had been a bit of a problem since it seemed to flow out and activate on its own whenever he used it. Tina told him that was probably because he had used it in such a hurry that he had forgotten to adjust its effects beforehand. Hiroki had not known that was something he could do. Tina explained that, in her own case, she could control the strength of her magic by choosing how much mana she put into it. Hiroki asked about how that applied to his shield. Tina explained that, under normal use, the shield could block up to 5 hits, but that the number of protections it offered would likely decrease if he chose to strengthen its defensive power. Hiroki understood and asked her to give him a moment to try it. He focused and imagined a shield that covered both himself and Tina with 5 layers of protection, while also picturing it without the glowing light. The shield took form around them. Tina was amazed. Hiroki noted with satisfaction that the glow was indeed gone. Tina asked whether it was all right that it was covering her as well. Hiroki asked if there was any issue with that. Tina explained that if he cast it over her, it would override the existing effect and reset her protection count. Hiroki said that was not a problem at all then. Dea spoke up and said that Hiroki was a really strange person. Hiroki was puzzled by the remark. Dea elaborated. Hiroki was clearly stronger than either of them, and yet he did not even know something as basic as adjusting skill effects. Just as Dea finished saying that, Hiroki let out a huge, long yawn. Dea commented that it was quite possibly the biggest yawn he had ever witnessed. Hiroki explained that he had not slept at all since the day before, and that after this he was planning to find Nin. Dea recommended a place called the Falling Star, saying the rooms were clean and, more importantly, the food there was exceptional. Hiroki's interest was immediately caught, and he asked if that was really true. Dea confirmed it, mentioning that their own group was staying there as well, and that Floyd was probably still asleep at that very moment after having drunk far too much the night before. A perfect example of a helpless adult, in Dea's opinion. Hiroki did not waste any more time and said they should all head to the Falling Star and right away. He turned to Tina and offered to carry her on his back. Tina went red with embarrassment and quickly told him she was fine, thanking him for the offer. She said she and Dea wanted to stay and hunt a little longer. Hiroki pointed out that she had just run out of mana, but Tina said she would recover some of it after resting for a bit. Hiroki accepted that and told them he would head to the inn first and see them there later. Tina said goodbye with a warm smile, though her heart was beating faster than she let on. After Hiroki had gone, Dea remarked with admiration that Hiroki really was something else. Tina agreed, saying she had never seen anyone fight the way he did. Later, at the Falling Star Inn, Dea's group arrived and then headed back out again not long after. Meanwhile, Hiroki had gone straight to his room and gasped with relief the moment he laid down on the bed. When he eventually came downstairs, he greeted the woman at the inn with a good morning. She told him with some amusement that he had slept like a log. Hiroki was puzzled. He had fallen asleep in the morning, so why was it still midday? The woman explained that he had actually been asleep for an entire day. Hiroki said he should have guessed, because his body felt completely refreshed. The woman remarked that the previous day must have been very exhausting for him. She set a plate of food in front of him, telling him it was a complimentary breakfast. Hiroki's eyes lit up at the sight of it. He started eating and came across something that he thought might have been a kind of caviar, something he had never tasted before. He praised it enthusiastically, saying it was truly delicious. The woman asked if he was an acquaintance of Floyd's. Hiroki said yes, and that Floyd and the others had been very kind to him. The woman smiled and said that made sense, as Floyd had always been the type to look out for others. That reminded Hiroki to ask whether Floyd's party was also staying at the inn. The woman confirmed they were regulars there, but unfortunately told him he had just missed them. They had left not long before he came downstairs. She mentioned that she had heard Hiroki was a newcomer to adventuring. She encouraged him to keep at it, told him there was always food waiting for him, and said he should not hesitate to ask her about anything he was unsure of, as she would do her best to fill him in. Hiroki thanked her warmly. He then asked if she happened to know of a good shop nearby that sold equipment. The woman said she did, and asked him to wait while she drew him a small map to get there. Hiroki was pleased. Not only had he been pointed toward a good store, but the dessert he had been given alongside his meal was also excellent. A little later, Hiroki stood outside the shop and was genuinely impressed. It looked like a well-established and reputable place from the outside, and the inside was just as polished and sophisticated. The selection of items on display also looked surprisingly fashionable. As he stepped in, a dwarf appeared and welcomed him, though the dwarf immediately pointed out that Hiroki's outfit was a rather odd one and asked if he was an adventurer and what his job was. Hiroki explained that he was not there for the usual reasons. He was looking for comfortable equipment that would help him evade better. The dwarf asked why on earth he would be after something like that. Hiroki explained that he had put all of his stat points into evasion, because in his view, a healer who could evade every single attack was the best kind of healer there was. The dwarf stared at him and called him complete oddball. Hiroki added with a bit of sigh that sadly, no parties had been willing to accept him because of it, even though he genuinely believed it was a good idea. The dwarf said bluntly that Hiroki had made a serious mistake and suggested he just give up on being an adventurer altogether. Hiroki refused. He said he had no regrets about investing in evasion. The dwarf pushed back, asking what he could possibly accomplish on his own if no party would take him. Hiroki said he did not mind going it alone, and that he was certain he would eventually meet someone who understood his way of thinking. The dwarf looked at him for a moment, and then said that it seemed like Hiroki had already made peace with the harder path. That was a good attitude to have, and the dwarf said he would be rooting for him. Hiroki was genuinely delighted to hear that. The dwarf then admitted honestly that he did not actually think the evasion healer concept was all that bad. He pointed out that just like adventurers grew stronger over time, monsters did too. And in a world where enemies kept getting more and more powerful, having a healer who could not be touched was not such a foolish idea after all. The dwarf pointed out that monsters could adapt and make their attacks fiercer when they faced adventurers who relied heavily on strong defense. However, he doubted there were many monsters out there capable of countering someone who was truly nimble and quick. Hiroki thought to himself that even a high-level adventurer would remain narrow-minded if they never bothered to invest their stats thoughtfully. He told the dwarf he was glad that a veteran in the craft thought the same way he did. The dwarf acknowledged it, but warned him that finding comrades was still not going to be easy. Hiroki said he already knew that. The dwarf asked what his budget was. Hiroki told him he had around 15,000 lots to work with. The dwarf replied with some surprise that with that amount, Hiroki could only afford equipment without any special enchantment on it, since enchanted pieces started at 50,000 lots at the very least. Hiroki asked whether special enchantments referred to equipment that could raise one's stats, the kind of thing added during the blacksmithing process. The dwarf confirmed that was exactly right and asked if Hiroki really did not know that dwarves were the undisputed masters of blacksmithing. Hiroki was amazed. It hit him that he had been talking to a real dwarf all along. More importantly, though, he had not even been aware that enchanted equipment existed. The dwarf told him to try touching one of the items on display to see what he meant. Hiroki reached out and touched one, and it showed a defense increase of +3. He could see the dwarf was right. He then asked whether the dwarf had anything that increased evasion. The dwarf looked at him and asked if Hiroki seriously expected him to carry such a niche product. Hiroki stared back with a puzzled expression. The dwarf told him not to look at him like that and said it was too early to give up. If there was nothing available, the dwarf would simply make one for him. Hiroki was delighted and said he would work on gathering the money in the meantime, if the dwarf did not mind. The dwarf said that was fine. As Hiroki went to leave, the dwarf tried to stop him but moved too quickly and nearly lost his balance. He caught himself and explained to Hiroki that his current money was actually enough to buy one of the enchanted pieces, so Hiroki could go ahead and choose one now. The dwarf could add the evasion enchantment to it later once Hiroki had saved up enough. The dwarf led him further into the shop and Hiroki followed. The dwarf asked which piece caught his eye. Hiroki noticed another display and asked if the dwarf had made it. The dwarf said it was not his work, but his niece's. He explained that the two of them often clashed because their views were very different. She prioritized design, while he prioritized function, and they argued about it regularly. Hiroki looked at the piece and privately thought the design was quite feminine. He was quietly relieved that the dwarf had not claimed to have made it himself, because he would not have known what to say in response to that. Something else in the shop caught Hiroki's attention. He asked the dwarf how much it cost. The dwarf told him it was actually a little over 15,000 lots, but said he would give Hiroki a discount on it. He told Hiroki to go try it on. Hiroki went to the fitting room and came back out wearing it. It fit him perfectly. The dwarf looked him over and chuckled, saying he did not look like a healer at all. Hiroki replied that he had no intention of lying about his job, though in the back of his mind, he acknowledged to himself that he was technically pretending to be a healer when he was actually a priest. He thanked the dwarf sincerely and said he would go gather more herbs as quickly as possible so he could get the money ready for the enchantment. The dwarf asked if he was planning to head to the slime cave. Hiroki had not heard of it and asked what that was. The dwarf was surprised he did not know. It was a dungeon filled with nothing but slimes, but it was also a place where a wide variety of high-quality herbs grew. Hiroki's eyes lit up. That sounded like an absolute goldmine to him. The dwarf said that was what everyone thought at first, but the problem was that the sheer number of slimes kept adventurers so occupied that they never actually had time to gather any herbs. Hiroki found that interesting and asked the dwarf to tell him where the dungeon was. The dwarf agreed, but gave him a firm warning first. Accidents serious enough to end a novice adventurer's career happened at that place, at least once a year. Hiroki was taken aback and admitted that sounded frightening. The dwarf told him plainly that he ought to give it up entirely. Hiroki said he would be fine and reminded the dwarf of his confidence in his evasion. The dwarf laughed and called him a confident one, then told him at the very least to stick to gathering herbs near the entrance and go no further. Hiroki said he understood. He handed over his payment, and the dwarf thanked him for his purchase. As Hiroki was about to leave, something caught his eye, a display of accessories. The dwarf asked if any of them had caught his interest. Hiroki said no, but then asked whether the dwarf carried any contract accessories. The dwarf apologized, saying that kind of item was very rare to come across in that part of the world. Hiroki admitted that he was actually looking for a way to break a contract that had already been made. Upon hearing that, the dwarf apologized again and said that was not something he had any knowledge about. Hiroki thanked him for his help and told him he was heading off to the slime cave. The dwarf called after him loudly, reminding him of his advice and telling him firmly never to go inside the cave itself. Hiroki said yes, and then went to the cave anyway. Outside the entrance, there were several signs posted, most of which appeared to be warnings. Hiroki could not read any of them, but having navigated the area for several days by that point, he was able to find his destination without much difficulty. He found the entrance and immediately thought it looked a little dangerous. He glanced over at a nearby river and noticed animals gathered there, drinking from it. He was about to remark on how peaceful and charming the scene was when he spotted slimes near the water. He turned away from the view and stepped inside the cave. Hiroki stepped onto the first floor of the slime cave and found slimes almost immediately. They bounced toward him one after another, and every single one missed. He kept walking. He quickly discovered that the cave was absolutely packed with herbs, and thought to himself that the dwarf had not been exaggerating at all. This place really was ideal for gathering. The dwarf had also not been joking about the number of enemies, because by the time Hiroki had taken a few steps, he had already passed his fifth slime. However, he noticed that the only herb growing on that floor seemed to be soothing grass. He wondered whether he should push a little deeper. He could still clearly hear the dwarf's words in his head, telling him to only take what was near the entrance. He genuinely wanted to keep his word to the dwarf, but staying on that floor was not going to get him very far. He still needed 50,000 lots for his custom enchanted equipment. He had already paid for that night at the inn, but tomorrow and every night after that was another matter entirely. Soothing grass alone would not come close to covering all of that, and the new clothes he had bought had already cleaned out what little money he had, leaving him with nothing left at all. The way he saw it, he had no real choice but to push forward to the floor where healing grass grew. At least the slimes could not follow him to the next floor, which meant he could go down, grab whatever herbs were close to the stairs, and come back up quickly. He just needed to find the stairs as soon as possible. As he moved forward, he noticed the number of slimes around him had grown to about 10 in a surprisingly short amount of time. That was starting to feel a little worrying. Looking ahead, he cursed under his breath. There was another cluster of slimes blocking the path in front of him. There were far more than he had anticipated. Counting the ones already at his feet, there were roughly 20 slimes surrounding him. With that many, it would not be surprising if his evasion could not keep up with all of them at once. But he had no choice. He needed money more than anything else right now. He pressed on and, to his relief, found the stairs without too much difficulty. The slimes kept launching attacks and missing as he walked. As he moved, a thought crossed his mind. He still had not properly tested the limits of his evasion ability. He had managed to dodge the boss monster in the stone dungeon, but he did not know exactly how far his evasion could actually stretch. Another slime attack flew past him and missed. He decided this was as good a time as any to find out. He also reminded himself that he needed to stay close to the stairs, just in case. He also found himself wondering where all the slimes were coming from, and the unsettling thought occurred to him that slimes might be capable of splitting indefinitely. He was grossed out by the idea that they might be dividing themselves at that very moment. Looking around, he noticed that his vision had gone slightly blurry. He recalled something Tina had told him and wondered if it had something to do with the shield he had cast the previous day, or perhaps the day before that. She had said the shield could protect him up to 5 times under normal use. The fact that the blurring had happened meant the shield effect had just been triggered, which in turn meant that his evasion had finally reached its limit. There were about 30 slimes around him now. Dodging all of them was no longer going to be easy. He thought about the dwarf's warning and the novice adventurers who had reportedly been overwhelmed by slimes in that very place. He decided it was time to end the experiment. He turned to look behind him and was shocked. The slimes had nearly flooded the entire passage. Then one attack caught him off guard. A slime bumped right into him. It hurt more than he had expected. He immediately cast his heal and shield skills and ran as fast as he could, desperate to get out. He cursed at the sheer number of them swarming around him. Even though slimes were normally cute little things that reminded him of mascot characters, he was absolutely certain that the bouncing sounds they made were going to show up in his nightmares that night. He reached the stairs, and the slimes stopped at the edge, unable to follow. He sat down on the steps and wheezed, catching his breath. He muttered to himself that it had been genuinely terrifying, but at least he now had a much better sense of where the limits of his current evasion ability lay. Looking back at the massive slimes he had left behind, he realized he had accidentally created something like a slime monster swarm. He was now on the second floor. Strangely, he had not seen a single slime since stepping onto it, and the only herb growing there was soothing grass again. Then one slime appeared. Hiroki looked at it and immediately noticed something different about it. It had small flaps on its body, and he could not quite tell whether they were ears or arms. Before he could figure it out, the slime bounced upward and the flaps spread open. They were wings. The slime could fly. Hiroki found it adorable and laughed. But the flying slime climbed high above him and then used a skill. Hiroki was shocked. He tried to dodge, but it connected with his foot. His eyes went wide. He could not move his body at all. He realized with alarm that he had been paralyzed. He immediately cast heal on himself, hoping it would clear the debuff. It did not. He understood then that healing magic was not the right tool for removing status ailments. He should have bought medicine while he was still in town. He was also baffled as to why such a strong slime was showing up as early as the second floor. The slime attacked again. He forced himself to stay calm, reminding himself that the shield effect was still active. The slime flew above him and came down hard. He braced himself, and then was surprised to find that it missed. He could not understand how that was possible. His body was completely frozen from the paralysis, yet somehow his evasion had activated on its own. It felt almost like being a tall tree, swaying gently from side to side in a light breeze without any conscious effort. He began to wonder just how extraordinary his evasion stat truly was. The slime kept attacking. It kept missing. The slime looked completely dejected. Hiroki thought to himself that the evasion stat had truly crushed that poor slime's confidence. As much as he felt a little sorry for it, the paralysis was almost wearing off, and once it did, he was sure the advantage would be entirely his. But just as the debuff was on the verge of fading, the slime flew up and hit him with the paralysis skill again. Hiroki suspected it had deliberately waited for exactly that moment. The slime seemed to psych itself up, convinced it would succeed this time. Hiroki realized grimly that if this cycle continued indefinitely, the only outcome waiting for him was slowly starving to death where he stood. That was absolutely not going to happen. The slime bounced toward him again and missed again. He thought hard about his situation. He had no means of attacking whatsoever. He genuinely had no idea what he was supposed to do. Then he heard voices nearby. One voice was saying they should stop there, that it was too scary. The other voice said it was fine and pushed forward. Hiroki realized there were other people on the floor. Flooded with relief, he shouted out for help. One of the voices recognized him. It was Tina. Another voice, which was Daya's, asked Tina in surprise if she had just said that was Hiroki. Hiroki called out to all three of them, Tina, Daya, and Floyd. He thought to himself with quiet gratitude that they must have been able to reach that floor because Floyd was with them. He silently thanked Floyd for being there. Floyd, for his part, asked what on earth Hiroki was doing alone in such a dangerous place. At the beginning of Chapter 8, the group came across Hiroki lying on the floor in a very weak state. Tina directed Floyd's attention toward a winged slime nearby, and Floyd quickly understood that the creature was responsible for bringing Hiroki down. Floyd noticed that the slime looked somewhat unusual compared to what he expected. Floyd took charge of the situation, instructing Daya to keep watch over their surroundings while telling Tina to make use of her fire ability. The slime wasted no time and launched another attack, but to Floyd's great surprise, Hiroki managed to dodge it. Daya reminded the group that this was Floyd's first time witnessing Hiroki's evasion, and Tina remarked that Hiroki had a remarkable talent for avoiding attacks. Daya agreed, finding it quite strange. Floyd told them to set the conversation aside for the time being, because the slime needed to be dealt with first. Floyd struck the slime, but it simply bounced back and went after Hiroki again. Tina fired off her skill while Floyd slashed at the creature, determined to keep it away from Hiroki. The slime dodged away but tried to go for Hiroki once more, though it missed. Hiroki was inwardly impressed that the slime was still standing after taking that much punishment, realizing it was far stronger than he had originally thought. The slime took to the air again and managed to catch Floyd off guard with an attack. Hiroki immediately used his healing ability on Floyd, who was grateful for it. Floyd launched another strike at the slime, landing a solid hit. The creature finally gave out and collapsed to the ground, defeated. Tina and Daya were overjoyed at their victory. Hiroki expressed his gratitude to Floyd, and Floyd was simply relieved to see that Hiroki was safe. Floyd helped Hiroki back on his feet and had him drink a paralysis healing potion. The taste was extremely bitter, and Hiroki reacted strongly to it. Floyd offered him water with a laugh. Tina remarked that since Hiroki was moving around so much from the bitterness of the potion, he was clearly going to be fine. Hiroki felt deeply thankful that he had crossed paths with the group, as he had genuinely believed he was going to die. Tina shared that Daya had been very eager to go down to the lower floors, and while she herself had been frightened, she was glad they had gone through with it. Hiroki thanked Daya, though Daya felt he had not really contributed much in the actual battle. Hiroki disagreed and insisted that Daya's presence had been helpful. He then became curious about why the group had chosen to come to such a dangerous place. Daya explained that going deep into the cave was the best way to train for fighting multiple enemies at the same time. Hiroki understood the reasoning. Floyd then pointed out that the slimes on the upper level were quite something, and when they looked back, they found that a large number of slimes had already gathered and were blocking the stairway. Hiroki apologized, explaining that the slimes had been following him ever since he tried to escape. Daya was taken aback, realizing that Hiroki must have arrived in the cave ahead of them. Floyd questioned why Hiroki had not simply fought the slimes instead of running, and also brought up the strange way Hiroki had moved when dodging the winged slime. Daya explained that while Hiroki could avoid almost any attack with great skill, he was completely unable to deal damage to enemies. Floyd was stunned by this. He could hardly believe that Hiroki had ventured into such a dangerous place entirely on his own despite being incapable of defeating anything. He let out a chuckle and called Hiroki a complete fool, though in a light-hearted way. Hiroki pushed back, pointing out that he had not exactly had many other options. Nobody had been willing to accept him into their party once they heard that he had put all his effort into raising his evasion stats. Floyd found the whole situation funny, and Tina told him he was laughing too much. Dea looked over at the mass of slimes blocking their path and suggested to Floyd that the situation was essentially a limitless opportunity to take out slimes. Floyd took a moment to process that thought, then realized that as long as they stayed on the stairs, the slimes could not attack them. He admitted it felt a little underhanded, but accepted that there was little else they could do given the circumstances. Dea was enthusiastic about the plan. Tina then suggested that they lend Hiroki a party bracelet. Hiroki was unfamiliar with what that was, and Dea teased him for seeming like a total newcomer. Tina explained that the bracelet was a special item that, when worn, would split the experience points evenly among everyone in the group. Hiroki noticed it was the same kind of bracelet Tina was already wearing, and Dea revealed that he and Floyd also wore the same type, hidden under their gloves. With everything in place, Hiroki could now properly gain experience alongside the group. Floyd gave the signal for them to begin. Hiroki raised a shield and used it to protect the others, which impressed Floyd and earned Hiroki Dea's gratitude. Floyd began his attack, and before long, all the slimes had been defeated. Once the battle was over, Dea remarked that the slimes had gone down more quickly than he had anticipated. Floyd shared the same thought, noting that most of them had fled rather than fought. Floyd then turned to Hiroki and apologized, feeling that Hiroki had not gained as much experience from the hunt as they had hoped. Hiroki was not bothered by it at all and expressed genuine appreciation for the group's help. He mentioned that thanks to them, he had reached level 2. Dea was completely shocked by this and could not believe what he was hearing, wondering if Hiroki had perhaps misread the number. Hiroki laughed a little awkwardly and agreed that Dea was probably right. Floyd looked at Hiroki for a moment and then asked him outright if he would like to join their party permanently. Hiroki was caught off guard by the offer. Tina immediately expressed how wonderful she thought the idea was. Hiroki hesitated and checked with Floyd, making sure he understood what he was agreeing to, pointing out that Hiroki was simply an evasion-focused healer with an unusual build. Floyd was completely unbothered by this. Hiroki also admitted that he apparently lacked a proper sense of what was considered normal or sensible. Dea brushed that off without concern. Tina then spoke with great enthusiasm about growing stronger as a group and exploring and learning about the world together. Hiroki was deeply moved by their warmth and acceptance. He took a brief moment to himself before giving his answer, and he agreed to join them. The rest of the party was overjoyed. Floyd immediately announced that they needed to throw a proper welcoming celebration for Hiroki once they returned, and he was already looking forward to drinking. Tina reminded him that he had already been drinking far too much as it was, and Dea commented with amusement that Floyd was at it again. Hiroki thought to himself that life with this group was certainly not going to be dull. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pen, a handkerchief, and a piece of paper. He had originally imagined that he would end up joining a party with Ruri and Run, but being part of Floyd's party was beginning to feel like it was not such a bad outcome after all. Floyd announced that it was time to continue their hunt, and Tina agreed. The party settled into their formation, with Floyd acting as the guardian at the front, Hiroki positioned as a rear-guard healer, Tina serving as a rear-guard focused on offense, and Dea taking on a role of vanguard. Hiroki cast his shield skill on Dea, who thanked him for it. As they pushed forward, Hiroki quietly reflected on how grateful he was to have been accepted into the group. However, a concern began to weigh on him. He had poured every single one of his stat points into evasion in order to make hunts more effective, but in a formation where the party had to defeat all enemies before moving ahead, he started to feel as though his particular build was not really necessary here. After Dea took down another slime, Hiroki called out to him and offered to take over the front line for a while, asking if Dea needed a rest. Dea refused right away, saying it was far too risky for someone in a rearguard role like Hiroki to be up front. Hiroki argued that he could dodge anything that came at him, but Dea stood firm and insisted that he was still in good shape and that Hiroki should leave the front to him. Dea made it clear that protecting the group from the front was his responsibility as the vanguard, and that he would be there regardless of what Hiroki did. He asked Hiroki with a touch of pride whether he came across as someone who could not be relied upon. Hiroki smiled and accepted Dea's words without pushing further. Floyd approached Hiroki shortly after and gently suggested that being in this party might feel a little underwhelming for someone of Hiroki's abilities, and that he had assumed Hiroki would have already found a place in a more powerful party. Hiroki simply chuckled at the remark. Inwardly, though, Hiroki was thinking that even after everything the group had seen of his evasion and healing skills, the way things were going made it feel as if his entire build was being overlooked or dismissed. He let out a quiet sigh. At that very moment, a slime launched a surprise attack from behind, but Hiroki slipped out of the way without any difficulty. Floyd burst out laughing and marveled at how Hiroki truly seemed to be able to dodge absolutely anything. Hiroki laughed along with him. Floyd mentioned that he would call the others once they had finished up. Suddenly, Dea shouted a warning. Hiroki was startled and found Dea's sword swinging close by. Dea demanded to know what Hiroki was doing and told him to fall back. Hiroki pointed out that Tina was also a rear guard, and while still in the middle of fighting a slime, Dea confirmed that she was. One of the slimes then moved toward Tina, and Hiroki quickly called out to warn her before telling Dea to go and help. Watching Tina, Hiroki assured himself that she would be all right since she still had his shield protecting her. Dea agreed with the assessment. Floyd remarked with a grin that it seemed like Dea was the one who needed to calm himself down. Dea acknowledged that having a healer in the group was a great comfort. Tina praised Hiroki, saying she thought he was truly amazing. Hiroki humbly denied it. Dea then turned back to Tina and reminded her that there were still slimes to deal with and that she needed to stay focused. Tina snapped back into action and hurried to finish off the remaining slimes. By the time night fell, the group had settled into the Falling Star Inn. Hiroki was completely exhausted and slumped over the table. Dea apologized to him, feeling bad that his own performance during the hunt had not been up to his usual standard. Hiroki understood exactly why, knowing full well that the two of them had been bickering on and off ever since the earlier incident. He kept that thought to himself, however, and simply encouraged Dea to give it his best effort next time. Dea promised that he would, and Hiroki gently reminded him not to push himself too hard. In Hiroki's mind, Dea was nothing but an endearing and straightforward young man. Floyd drew everyone's attention away from all of that and raised the occasion of celebrating with drinks. He proposed a toast to the newest member of their party. All of them lifted their mugs together and cheered. Floyd urged Hiroki to drink up, but Hiroki admitted quite plainly that he could not handle alcohol at all. A woman nearby announced that drinks were not the only thing worth looking forward to, and Floyd reacted with delight as a large and delicious meal was brought out and placed on the table. Dea dug in with satisfaction, declaring that the food really hit the spot and that the woman who prepared it was the best. While they were all eating, Floyd brought up something he had apparently heard recently. Word had gotten around that a hero had arrived in the kingdom. Hiroki was taken aback upon hearing this. He thought to himself with some surprise that news of Run had already begun to spread and circulate through the area. Floyd brought up what he had heard about the hero being in the kingdom and expressed that it made him want to meet the hero at least once. Hiroki was quietly surprised to learn that news about Run had already spread so widely, considering that it had only been a few days since they had arrived in this world. He asked Floyd where he had heard this from, and Floyd was a little taken aback, finding it interesting that Hiroki was also curious about the hero. Hiroki kept his true reasons to himself, and simply thought that it was the dream of every child to meet a hero, which was a perfectly reasonable thing to say out loud. What he could not say, of course, was that he had actually arrived in this world together with that very hero. Floyd went on to share what else he had heard. Apparently, the hero was working very hard at the moment to raise his level, and had been pushing himself to enter a particularly dangerous dungeon. That place was said to be full of traps and monsters capable of inflicting bad status effects on anyone who ventured inside. On top of all of that, there were also rumors that the hero had been struck by a powerful curse. Hiroki's gaze dropped at hearing this. Floyd added that it was a tough situation and hoped that the hero had thought to bring along a purification potion, even though such things were known to be outrageously expensive. Hiroki's eyes went wide at the mention of that. However, before the conversation could go any further, Floyd had already passed out from the alcohol. Tina said with resignation that she had seen this coming. Dea explained to Hiroki that Floyd had very little tolerance for alcohol, yet kept drinking anyway. Dea then moved things along and suggested they keep Hiroki's welcoming celebration going, this time raising their cups with juice instead. They all toasted together and carried on with the evening. Later that same night, well past midnight, Hiroki quietly slipped out of the inn on his own and made his way to the stone dungeon. The reason he was out alone in a dungeon at such a late hour came down to one simple and embarrassing fact. He was completely broke. He sighed to himself as he thought about it. While he was still scraping together whatever money he could by collecting herbs in the area, Rin and Ruri had already moved on to more dangerous places in order to raise their levels. He reminded himself that they had both received generous bonus points when they were summoned to this world, so they should be in decent shape. He also did not think either of them were the type to throw their lives away recklessly. It was more likely that the king had pushed them into doing it. The thought made him curse inwardly. He told himself firmly that he needed to get stronger, and that meant raising his level. He recalled that he had actually managed to reach a new level earlier that afternoon. He opened up his status plate and looked it over. He noticed that he had one stat point available. Something clicked for him in that moment. He finally understood why people always said that healers who put points in anything other than recovery were considered useless. It was because a person only became recognized as a true master once their stat points in a given area reached 50. The normal path was to pour everything into a single stat until reaching level 50. He thought back to the dwarf he had met earlier, and wondered if that person had been cheering him on not as an evasion healer specifically, but simply as a fellow stubborn and determined soul. He was deeply relieved that he had not told anyone at the guild about his actual stats. If word got out that he had a combined total of 150 points split between recovery and evasion, people would likely look at him like he was some kind of freak. He decided quietly to put the single available point into evasion once again and leave it at that. The following morning, Hiroki came downstairs to find Floyd sitting with his head in his hands, clearly suffering from the night before. Floyd apologized and said he was in no shape to join them that day. Dea came down the stairs shortly after, greeted everyone cheerfully, and Floyd told him to take care of things in his absence. Dea agreed without hesitation. Hiroki remarked that Floyd was clearly not doing well, and Dea brushed it off as nothing unusual before telling Hiroki they should head out. Tina then asked Hiroki with some concern whether he was doing all right. He was a bit confused by the question. She asked again, this time wondering whether he had actually gotten enough sleep the night before. Hiroki laughed it off lightly. Inside his head, the honest answer was that he had not slept even a single wink. Hiroki asked if they could stop by the guild before heading out. Dea agreed easily, mentioning that they needed to pick up some quests there anyway. They made their way to the guild in the royal capital. At the reception desk, a woman named Hala greeted Hiroki and remarked that he always brought in good quality items. She then mentioned that there was a message posted on the board that had been left for him, written by someone named Ruri. At the sound of that name, Hiroki's thoughts turned to her. Ruri was the high school girl who had been summoned to this world at the same time as him. She carried herself with a quiet elegance that gave the impression of a refined and graceful young woman, and it was precisely because of that impression that both Run and Hiroki had felt a strong sense of wanting to look out for her. The letter she had left said that she would be waiting for him at a place called the Plum Bar for 2 nights. Hala pointed out that the message had been posted the day before, which meant the meeting would be happening the following day. Hiroki found it striking that Ruri had reached out to contact him, and the thought crossed his mind that something might have gone wrong for the two of them. From a little distance away, Tina and Dea called over to ask if Hiroki was ready to go. He pulled himself together and said that he was. Later, the 3 of them arrived at the stone dungeon. Tina noted that this was actually their first time going into the dungeon without Floyd with them. Dea was not worried, saying that things would be fine with Hiroki there. Hiroki downplayed himself, insisting he was not all that impressive. He cast a shield skill, and Dea thanked him for it. Hiroki thought to himself that he already knew this dungeon from the night before, and began quietly mapping out the layout in his head, trying to figure out the fastest route to the stairs leading deeper inside. Before long, Dea announced that he had found an item on the ground, and the group moved forward and made their way to the stairs leading down to the 2nd floor. Tina immediately became uneasy and protested that going down to the 2nd floor with just the 3 of them felt far too reckless. Dea insisted that going to the 2nd floor would be fine since Hiroki was with them, and he also pointed out that they needed to practice the formation they had worked on the day before. Hiroki smiled and agreed to give it a go. Tina was surprised that even Hiroki was on board with the idea, while Dea reacted with excitement and enthusiasm. Once they reached the 2nd floor, wild rats appeared and immediately went after Hiroki. Dea worked on keeping the rats occupied and under control, while one of them missed Hiroki entirely. Tina followed up with her fire magic. As the battle played out, Hiroki thought to himself that as long as they kept steadily building on their teamwork bit by bit, there was absolutely no doubt that they would grow into a truly great party before long. The rats were eventually defeated. Dea called Hiroki over and showed him how he had taken down the enemy in front of him, asking whether he had done it right. Hiroki told him it was pretty well done. Dea then picked up the item that had been dropped by the enemy. At that moment, someone from another guild suddenly appeared, a man who was calling out to a woman named Lusha behind him, urging her to hurry over. Hiroki and the others turned to look at what was going on. The man recognized Hiroki as the healer he had encountered before and greeted him. Hiroki greeted him back. The man muttered quietly to himself, noting that Hiroki had managed to find a party to join and that things seemed to have worked out for him. Dea and Tina watched the man with a cautious and guarded look. The man then mentioned that his group was heading down to the lower floors and casually asked what Hiroki's group was planning. The woman beside him gently told the man not to tease Hiroki too much, then turned to Hiroki herself and told him that they would see each other on the next floor if his party could manage to get there. Behind the man, an elf was quietly following along, carrying a bag. When Hiroki looked at her, he immediately recognized from her appearance that she was indeed an elf. Tina asked Hiroki if he knew that party. Hiroki said not really, explaining that he had only exchanged a few words with them at the guild. Tina mentioned that they were actually quite a well-known and impressive party. Dea dismissed them with a scoff, saying they were nothing remarkable and that they came across as rude and unpleasant. The group then spent the rest of that day hunting rats on the 2nd floor. The following day, the fully recovered Floyd rejoined them, and the group spent their time sharpening their teamwork together at the slime cave. Once the sun had gone down, Hiroki told the others to head back without him, letting them know he had something to take care of that evening. He then made his way to a place called the Plum Bar, where Ruri spotted him and waved. He waved back. He asked if she had been waiting long, and she told him she had only just arrived herself. The other men in the bar were murmuring among themselves, having noticed Ruri's striking appearance and commenting that her companion had finally shown up. Ruri asked Hiroki how he had been doing. She took one look at his new equipment and gathered that things were going reasonably well for him. He confirmed this, saying the rewards from his gathering quests had turned out to be decent enough. The drunk men nearby were still watching them. Hiroki asked Ruri how she was getting on, and brought up the rumors he had been hearing. People were saying that the hero was currently leveling up in a very dangerous dungeon, and he had also heard that there were monsters in that place capable of inflicting a powerful curse. He urged her to be careful. There was a moment of silence. Hiroki noticed that Ruri was not responding, and something about that silence made him realize something was wrong. It was then that Ruri told him the truth. Ren had already been hit by that very curse during their time adventuring together. Shortly after it struck him, a mark resembling snake tracks appeared across his body. While it did not look too severe at first glance, it was slowly spreading across his entire body, and if left unchecked, the curse would eventually tighten around him and kill him. To make things worse, a purification potion had been tried and had no effect whatsoever, leaving them with absolutely no idea how to break the curse. On top of everything, the king had offered nothing more than vague words about searching for a solution without actually doing anything meaningful to help. Ruri had also taken it upon herself to search through the royal library and speak with every researcher she could find, but none of it had led anywhere useful. Hiroki cut her off before she could finish and told her firmly that he understood and that he would try asking around at the guild and among other adventurers to see if anyone knew anything. Ruri thanked him with genuine relief. Hiroki told her there was no need for thanks. In his heart, he was completely resolved that he would not allow Run to die. Ruri felt the same way. She said quietly that all three of them were going to return to their world together. She looked down as she said it. Hiroki then asked her whether she was tired of being pushed around by the king. Ruri said she was managing all right. So far the king had only been ordering them to raise their levels, and since she herself wanted to grow stronger anyway, their goals were currently pointing in the same direction, so it was not entirely unpleasant. Hiroki asked what level she had reached. Ruri opened her status plate and held it out for him to see for himself. She was now level 16, working as a wizard. Her defense sat at 18 and her magic at 118, with all other stats at a single point each. Hiroki was taken aback. Ruri explained that she and Run had been hunting together without anyone else. She reassured Hiroki that she was confident he would catch up to them before long. Hiroki said he would do his very best. He also quietly noticed that Ruri had picked up several new skills since he had last seen her. Then, without warning, two drunk men walked over to where they were sitting. One of them made a rude remark directed at Hiroki, suggesting he was showing off, and they pushed to be included in whatever was going on. Ruri stood up from her seat. One of the drunk men told her not to be so serious and pressed her to have a good time with them instead. But Hiroki stepped forward and placed himself between Ruri and the men, firmly telling them to stop. The men grew angry and told Hiroki to get out of the way. One of them threw a punch, but it missed him completely. He tried again, and Hiroki dodged that one too. Ruri told Hiroki they should just leave. He agreed, but the drunk men moved to block their path, one of them asking Ruri why she was being so cold, while the other smirked and suggested that perhaps they wanted things to go the hard way instead. They lunged toward Ruri, but she was already moving. She used earth magic, and hands rose up from the ground and grabbed hold of the men's clothing. She then followed it with wind magic, and the result left the men completely stripped of what they had been wearing. Ruri remarked calmly that those two were like harmless little puppies compared to the rowdy young men in her own family. Hiroki stared at her in disbelief and asked what she meant by that. Ruri caught herself and brushed the comment aside as if she had not meant to say it. Hiroki thought to himself, reflecting on how he and Run had always seen Ruri as a delicate girl who needed to be looked after and protected. He was now beginning to wonder if she might actually be the most fearsome one among the three of them. Ruri explained that Run had been struck by a curse from a monstrous snake, and that if nothing was done about it, Run would die from the curse within a few months. Hiroki thought to himself that things had gotten complicated once again. Later, Hiroki brought the matter up with Floyd and asked him about ways to break curse. Floyd explained that purification potions came in 3 different grades, which were elementary, intermediate, and advanced. Hiroki asked whether there was anything beyond the advanced level. Floyd confirmed that there was, and that such potions could be found inside dungeon chests or produced at a country's research institute, though the ingredients needed to make them were extremely difficult to gather, which made creating them at a research institute a very challenging task. Hiroki thought this over. He recalled that when he had been gathering medicinal herbs earlier, he had confirmed the existence of a magic circle, and figured that the boss of the dungeon would need to be defeated before he could make use of it. Based on what Ruri had shared, it seemed that even the more accessible options were unlikely to work. Floyd then suggested that the demons had likely made considerable progress in researching how to break curses. Hiroki was curious and asked him to go on. Floyd continued, explaining that demons were generally very knowledgeable when it came to magic and curses. The demon continent was a place overflowing with magical energy, which naturally drew researchers and alchemists to gather there, resulting in a large number of research facilities being established in that region. Hiroki took all of this in. Floyd added that the guild might have books related to the demons that could be of use. That caught Hiroki's attention right away. Hiroki asked Floyd if it would be all right to stop by the guild before they headed out. Floyd saw no reason why not. Tina asked if she could come along too, and Floyd thought that would be a great idea. Hiroki thanked Tina, and the two of them headed off together while Floyd stayed behind. At the Adventurers Guild in the royal capital of Piznut Kingdom, Hiroki asked the receptionist about breaking curses. Hala, the woman at the desk, explained that potions could be obtained from shops, found in dungeon chests, or produced by research institutes in various countries. If it was a skill they were looking for, the guild also had high-ranking books that they had acquired in the past. Hiroki took note of this, though he thought to himself that getting his hands on skill acquisition books would require tackling high-difficulty dungeons, which was out of reach for him at his current level. Tina then stepped in and asked Hala whether they had any books on pharmaceutics written by demons. Hala confirmed that they did and asked Tina to wait a moment before going to retrieve the book. Tina thanked her. Hiroki was puzzled about why they had needed to ask specifically for it, and Hala explained that the king held a strong prejudice against the demons, which meant such materials were not openly displayed. Hiroki understood immediately. It also explained why Ruri had come up empty-handed when she searched through facilities connected to the kingdom, as none of them would have had anything demon-related on display. Hala added that because the guild maintained a neutral position, they were able to keep such books, though they were careful not to put them out where anyone could freely see them. Tina explained to Hiroki that this meant unless someone specifically asked for a demon-related book, the guild staff would not bring it out on their own, especially given that the kingdom was actively promoting the defeat of the demon lord. Tina then looked through the book and found the section on how to create a curse removal potion, which filled Hiroki with relief. Hala watched them quietly. Tina began reading aloud from the book and found that in order to create the highest grade potion, an ingredient called apricot grass was required. It was described as a medicinal herb that contained an exceptionally high amount of magical energy. The name stirred something in Hiroki's memory, and he recalled what apricot grass looked like. Tina read on and found that apricot grass only grew in specific environments and had been confirmed to exist solely on the demon continent. This matched what Floyd had mentioned before. Hala clarified that the demon continent was the land where the demons lived. Hiroki reasoned to himself that if the herb was named after the continent, there was very little doubt that it could be found there. He made a mental note to leave a message for Ruri about what they had discovered. Tina said with excitement that she hoped to visit the demon continent herself one day, once she had grown into a strong enough adventurer. Hala encouraged her warmly and suggested that at the rate Tina was progressing, it might take her only 1 to 2 years to get there. Tina said she was looking forward to it very much. Hiroki, however, was quietly alarmed. 1 to 2 years was far too long. Rin did not have that kind of time. He thought about the powerful demons that lived on the demon continent and quietly decided that he should not drag Tina and the others into something so dangerous. This was something he would have to deal with on his own terms. Near the entrance, Floyd and Dea were waiting and asked if they were ready to go. The group then made their way to the stone dungeon. Hiroki activated his shield skill for everyone in the party, and Dea thanked him. Hiroki noticed that there were a lot more adventurers in the dungeon than usual. Dea remarked to Floyd that working alongside Hiroki had become much more natural for him now, and Floyd responded that it was good to hear, adding that their goal for the day was to push all the way down to the 5th floor. The rest of the group agreed. As they descended to the 2nd floor, they found other adventurers already engaged in fighting the rats there. Tina commented to Hiroki that things seemed very calm and peaceful, pointing out that with so many adventurers around, monsters would not be appearing nearly as often. Hiroki's mind drifted as he walked. He found himself thinking about the many problems that stood between him and reaching the demon continent. The 2 biggest ones were money and combat strength. Setting aside the issue of funds, the lack of firepower was the more pressing concern, and he began to wonder whether he should consider hiring stronger adventurers to accompany him. Tina noticed that Hiroki seemed distracted and asked him if something was bothering him. He was caught off guard. She pointed out that he had a very serious expression on his face. Before he could respond, Floyd suddenly called out for Tina to use her magic, and Dea called out to Hiroki for his shield. Floyd had already engaged the rats. Tina and Hiroki both snapped back to attention, quickly used their respective skills, and apologized for losing focus. Floyd reminded them that even with fewer monsters around, they still could not afford to let their guard down. Both Tina and Hiroki acknowledged this and apologized again. Eventually, the group made it down to the 5th floor. Floyd suggested they sit down and take a short rest before pushing on further. Tina handed Hiroki some water, and he thanked her. Floyd looked over at Hiroki and remarked that he had been acting strangely. He asked if something had happened. Hiroki hesitated and started to stammer, but before he could say anything, Dea spotted something and drew their attention to the party they had encountered previously. That group was approaching the stairs, and the mood around them was noticeably tense and agitated. Floyd observed that something seemed off about them. Hiroki wondered quietly if something bad had happened to them. Dea said that he had a bad feeling about the situation. As the other party neared the stairs, their leader recognized Hiroki's group. The man immediately snapped at Dea, telling him he was in the way and to move. Floyd calmly warned the man to be careful. Hiroki could see that the members of the other party were injured. Since they were still on their feet and moving, he decided it was not necessary for him to step in and heal them. But then he noticed Lusha at the back of the group, crouching down on the floor and struggling to get back up on her own. Hiroki immediately ran over to her. The party leader looked back at Lusha and told her bluntly that she was completely useless. Lusha looked up from the floor. The man then told her to hand her luggage over to him. Hiroki felt a brief sense of relief, assuming from this that the man still considered Lusha part of the group. But then the man said something that shocked everyone. He announced that the rest of them would be leaving ahead and that Lusha could find her own way back. Hiroki and the others could not believe what they were hearing. Lusha tried to call out to her party leader, but every single one of them ignored her and walked away without looking back. Lusha collapsed to the floor. Floyd raised his voice after the departing leader, demanding to know what kind of person he thought a companion was supposed to be. The man answered without any hint of guilt, saying that he was simply letting someone who could not walk rest where she was, and questioned what the problem with that was before hurrying off. Floyd muttered under his breath in disbelief at what kind of person could think that way. Hiroki went straight to Lusha and used his healing ability on her. He asked if she was all right and offered her water. He carefully helped her drink it. Lusha thanked him. Hiroki was quietly furious on her behalf, thinking to himself that the members of her party were absolutely the worst kind of people. He looked at her and could see that the young elf was covered in wounds from head to toe. Lusha thanked Hiroki for his help and said that she had already settled down and calmed herself. She introduced herself as Lusha Plum and described herself as something of an archer. Hiroki introduced himself in return, telling her he was an evasion healer and that he would be counting on her if he ever found himself in a tough spot. The two of them looked at each other for a moment, and Lusha repeated the words evasion healer with a puzzled expression, as though she had never heard of such a thing. Tina introduced herself as a magician. Dea said he was the Vanguard Knight, and Floyd described himself as something like a guardian for the group. Dea then voiced what everyone was thinking, expressing his disbelief at how Lusha's former party could do something as terrible as leaving a companion behind in a dungeon. Lusha admitted that she had caused some trouble for them and had been a burden, but she had never imagined they would actually abandon her. Hiroki asked her to explain further. Lusha told him that she had put every single one of her stat points into attack power and had not invested anything into accuracy. Hiroki asked her to confirm that she had not raised her accuracy at all. She confirmed it. Floyd pointed out that an archer with low accuracy was a genuine danger to her own allies, since her arrows could easily end up hitting them instead of the enemy. Hiroki asked if that was the reason she had been made to carry the luggage the whole time. Lusha said yes, and that since no party would normally accept an archer in her condition, carrying bags had been her only role throughout. Hiroki felt a strong sense of familiarity hearing her story, as though he was looking at a reflection of his own situation. He asked her what she had done before becoming an adventurer. Lusha explained that she used to hunt around her village, where the monsters were the kind that needed to be taken down in a single shot, otherwise things would turn dangerous very quickly. Hiroki asked whether she had managed to hit enemies before in her hunting days. She said yes, that she would keep shooting until she connected. Tina then pointed out that if hitting allies was the problem, then Hiroki was the perfect solution. Hiroki agreed and said they should test it out. He told everyone he would go gather some monsters, and Dea told Lusha that Hiroki would be back quickly and that she should get herself ready. Hiroki returned shortly after, bringing a group of killer moles with him. Lusha was alarmed and cried out that it was dangerous, warning the others. But the rest of the group simply stood there grinning. Hiroki told Lusha to start shooting at the killer moles. She hesitated, clearly worried about hitting someone. Hiroki told her it was fine and that he would simply evade whatever came his way. Lusha watched in astonishment as he dodged with ease. Hiroki offered to use his shield as well if it would make her feel more comfortable. Lusha steadied herself and took up her bow. Hiroki stood completely still and open in front of her. The arrows flew and missed him entirely. Lusha's jaw dropped in disbelief. Hiroki called out to her and pointed out that none of the arrows had hit him and encouraged her to keep shooting without worrying. Lusha took a breath and made up her mind. She drew her bow again with a look of fierce determination in her eyes and began firing at the moles. Her arrows found their mark, and she was so shocked by it that she covered her mouth with her hand. Hiroki cheered with delight, pointing out that she had achieved one-shot kills and had already taken down 2 enemies at once. The rest of Floyd's party celebrated behind her with great excitement. Lusha was overjoyed. Hiroki reminded her that there were still 3 enemies left and signaled for her to continue. She acknowledged him and kept firing. One by one, the remaining killer moles were brought down and defeated. Floyd remarked that the sheer damage she was putting out was remarkable even under these circumstances. Lusha turned to Hiroki and told him happily that she had done it. Hiroki praised her for a job well done. Floyd said with satisfaction that things had worked out well. He then observed that Lusha probably had no path back to her old party anyway, and asked her outright if she would like to join their group instead. Lusha asked with genuine surprise whether that was really all right, and added that as long as Hiroki was there, she felt she could actually be useful. Hiroki paused and did not answer right away. Tina agreed to the idea with obvious excitement. Dea assured Lusha that she would not get hurt with him around. Inside his own mind, Hiroki was struggling. He knew what he had to do, and saying it out loud was not going to be easy. He needed to travel to the Demon Continent, a place filled with powerful and dangerous monsters, in order to obtain the apricot grass that could save Ren. He could not in good conscience bring Floyd and the others into that kind of danger. He had to go alone, but he knew he had to be honest with them. Hiroki spoke up and told the group that when it came to the party, he was thinking of going on a journey and that Lusha could take his place. He added that he was truly sorry, especially since they had only just welcomed him in. Before he could finish, Tina jumped in and said that if it was a journey, then they would all go together. Floyd gently told Tina not to be selfish about it, and then asked Hiroki directly where he was planning to go. Hiroki told them it was the Demon Continent. Floyd went quiet for a moment, and then said with understanding that he could see why they could not come along. Hiroki acknowledged that he did not want to involve them, but explained that he was running out of time, and that the reason behind the journey was tied to the life of someone very important to him. Tina, upon hearing this, argued all the more strongly that it was exactly the kind of situation where they should all go together. Floyd told her no, explaining that if they went they would only slow Hiroki down and get in his way. Tina's eyes filled with tears as she asked whether Hiroki was really going to leave the party. Hiroki gently placed his hand on her head and apologized to her. Tina wiped her tears away and composed herself, saying she was fine and apologizing for her reaction. She then told Hiroki with quiet resolve that she would grow stronger and wait for him to come back. Hiroki was left feeling genuinely guilty about the situation. Dea moved over to comfort Tina while Floyd asked Hiroki whether he was planning to leave right away. Hiroki confirmed that he was. Tina quickly chimed in with the realization that today would then be the last time all of them would hunt together. Hiroki said yes. Rather than dwelling on the sadness of it, Tina immediately rallied herself and declared that they should give it everything they had. She turned to Dea and Floyd and urged them to do the same. Dea agreed, though with some hesitation. Floyd and Hiroki both watched Tina with quiet admiration. Floyd then turned his attention to practical matters and pointed out that they needed to update the party settings on Lusha's bracelet. Lusha thanked him. Floyd also noted that the group would need to think carefully about how to form up without Hiroki in the future. Hiroki offered a suggestion. He proposed that Lusha handle attacking when enemies were still at a distance, and then once the enemies closed in, the rest of the party would engage them in close combat as normal. At that point, Lusha would shift to the back line and focus on taking out any monsters that came at them from behind. Floyd agreed that it was a solid plan and said they would go with that strategy. Lusha said that she shot best when there was no one in her line of fire and promised to give it her all. Hiroki said he would be there to support her for the rest of the day. The party pushed forward from the 5th floor all the way down to the 7th floor, where mini orcs began to appear. As they fought their way through the dungeon, the group's coordination continued to improve with each encounter. Lusha fired her arrows and cried out with delight each time she landed a hit. Hiroki praised her for hitting them one after another. Lusha giggled with happiness. Hiroki thought to himself that her accuracy was the kind of thing that would be considered completely unthinkable by normal standards in this world, but her ability to bring enemies down in a single shot more than made up for it in his eyes. Tina declared that she was going to push herself harder too and let loose with her fire magic. Dea cheered her on loudly. The mini orcs were defeated. Hiroki spotted more enemies approaching and immediately cast a shield in preparation. Another wave of mini orcs appeared. Lusha pointed out with some concern that since the mini orcs were coming one right after another, she would not have a clear enough window to attack safely. Tina stepped up and charged forward, unleashing her fire magic at the enemies and firing again immediately after. Then another group of mini orcs appeared from behind the party. Lusha signaled urgently that there were enemies coming from the rear and that they were already dangerously close. Hiroki moved quickly toward those enemies and deliberately drew their attention to himself, calling out to the others to attack while the mini orcs were focused on him. Lusha acknowledged him and fired her arrows, but they missed. She fired again and missed again. Hiroki noticed that there was quite a long gap between each of her shots. He encouraged her not to hold back. Lusha stuttered out an agreement, but clearly still struggled. Hiroki understood why. Even knowing that he would dodge it, there was something deeply unsettling about pointing a weapon directly at another person. Thinking it through, he came up with a different way to frame it for her. He told her to stop trying to avoid hitting him altogether and instead told her to actually try to hit him if she wanted to. Lusha's face went red. Hiroki gave her a calm and reassuring smile. She understood what he meant and steadied herself. She announced that she was going to aim at him for real this time. She drew and fired, and the arrows flew past Hiroki and struck the mini orcs directly. Hiroki called out in amazement at how fast and clean the shots were. The mini orcs were taken down. He praised Lusha enthusiastically. Lusha stared at him in disbelief, amazed that he had truly avoided every single arrow. Hiroki said it really did feel like he had evaded all of them, and thought to himself that things were going to be interesting going forward. But then a heavier thought settled over him. He was going to be leaving this party very soon. Tina used her fire magic again and pushed herself further, firing one shot after another with fierce intensity. Hiroki watched her and thought about how much she and Dea had both grown over the past few days. Seeing that gave him some comfort. He felt that he could leave the party without having to worry too much about them. Then he noticed something and looked more closely at Tina. She did not look well at all. He asked if he should cast a heal on her. She was about to wave it off and say she was fine, but before the words were fully out, Tina's legs gave way and she collapsed. She lost consciousness entirely. Hiroki rushed to her side. The mini orcs had already been defeated, so he quickly tried to cast heal on her. Floyd told him that Tina had simply run out of mana and that her life was not in any danger. She had pushed her magic far beyond what her body could currently handle. Hiroki took in what Floyd said and understood that in this world, using more magic than one's body could sustain led to losing consciousness. He murmured quietly, wondering why she had pushed herself so recklessly. Floyd answered simply that Tina had probably wanted to show Hiroki her best side before he left. Hiroki was quietly struck by that. Floyd suggested they make their way back up to the higher floors and asked Hiroki if he could take care of Tina. Hiroki agreed without hesitation and carefully lifted Tina onto his back to carry her. He thought to himself with some private uncertainty that endurance was honestly the stat he felt least confident in, and he was not entirely sure he could carry her all the way to the top. But he quickly pushed that thought aside, recognizing that this was not the moment to be worrying about something like that. As he carried her, Tina stirred faintly and murmured his name. When they finally arrived at the entrance to the royal capital, Floyd let out a breath of relief. Hiroki asked with concern whether Tina was going to be all right. Floyd reassured him that while she had completely drained her mana, she would recover fine after getting some proper rest. He added that Tina had grown very attached to Hiroki, and that his leaving was hitting her particularly hard. Her desire to go with him had pushed her to overexert herself far beyond her limits. Floyd carefully took Tina from Hiroki and said he would carry her back to the inn himself. He asked Hiroki and Lusha to go ahead and trade in the materials they had gathered. Hiroki agreed, waved, and told Floyd they would be back shortly. As the two of them walked together, Lusha remarked that Hiroki must be worn out from carrying Tina. Hiroki said he was fine. He asked about Lusha and brought up what had happened with her previous party. Lusha said she had already moved past it. She had come to realize that she simply had not been a good fit for that group, and that she actually felt much more at home with everyone in Floyd's party. As she said this, she skipped along happily. Hiroki admitted that her cheerfulness caught him a little off guard. Lusha laughed and said she felt the same way about herself. Hiroki told her that even after he left the party, he believed she would continue to fit in well with the others. Lusha said that was probably true. They made their way to the guild in the royal capital. Hiroki greeted Hala at the reception desk and let her know they had returned. Hala greeted him warmly and then noticed Lusha standing beside him. Hiroki explained that Lusha had become a new member of Floyd's party. Lusha mentioned matter-of-factly that her previous party had abandoned her inside the dungeon. Hala was visibly shocked and said firmly that she would need to reprimand them for that. Lusha, on the other hand, said cheerfully that she thought it had actually turned out to be a good thing in the end. Hala agreed that it certainly seemed that way. Hiroki asked if Hala could purchase the materials they had brought in. She agreed right away and told them the total value came to 15,000 lot. Hiroki thanked her and the two of them turned to leave. But as they walked away, Lusha's former party leader appeared and confronted them, demanding to know whether Hiroki had taken Lusha into his party. The man looked furious. Hiroki calmly asked him if there was something he needed. The party leader shot back with a sneer, saying that of course it would be someone as useless as the evasion guy who would bother picking up a worthless archer. Hiroki looked at the man and thought to himself that he looked genuinely menacing. He was not sure how to handle the situation. The other adventurers in the guild had already taken notice and were watching. Lusha stepped up and defended Hiroki, telling the man that Hiroki was not useless at all. The party leader reacted with immediate hostility, snapping back at her. He dropped what he was holding and swung his fist at Hiroki, apparently intent on proving his point by force. Lusha gasped in shock. Hiroki quickly moved in front of her to protect her. Hala shouted at them to stop, reminding everyone that fighting was strictly forbidden inside the guild. The party leader's punch missed Hiroki completely. Hala stared in disbelief. The man grew angrier and attacked again, shouting aggressively, but once again his fist found nothing but air. The adventurers watching could not believe what they were seeing. Even Hala could not hide her surprise. People began murmuring among themselves, wondering what was happening. The party leader kept swinging wildly, and Hiroki kept avoiding every single hit through the power of his evasion stat. The man then tried to kick, which also missed entirely. Growing increasingly furious and frustrated, he pulled out his sword. Hiroki went still with shock. Hala cried out, and Lusha called Hiroki's name in panic. Hala covered her eyes, unable to watch. But even the sword missed him completely. The party leader told Hiroki not to assume he was safe just yet. But before he could do anything further, a large and imposing figure stepped up behind him and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. The enormous man told the party leader that the one whose safety was actually in question was himself, and warned him plainly that he stood to lose his right to work as an adventurer if he kept this up. The party leader froze on the spot. After a tense moment, he turned and looked at Lusha. Lusha met his gaze with a brief look of surprise, but then deliberately turned her head away from him, making it clear she wanted nothing to do with him. The party leader gritted his teeth. He turned and walked away, muttering that he had not been interested in Lusha to begin with. Hiroki let out a long breath and said he was completely exhausted. When he and Lusha turned around, they found that a large crowd of adventurers had gathered and witnessed the entire scene. Someone in the crowd remarked with amazement that they had never expected Hiroki to be able to dodge like that, admitting they had been certain he was going to get hit. Another person in the crowd turned to ask if Lusha was doing all right, saying they had been worried about her since she was always the one stuck carrying everyone's bags. Yet another adventurer said they were glad to hear she had found herself a new party to belong to. Lusha thanked everyone warmly and told them she had joined a truly wonderful party. One of the adventurers offered to treat her to a drink as a small celebration. Lusha thanked him, but was uncertain about accepting. Hiroki explained that they needed to get back quickly, but another adventurer pushed back lightly, suggesting there was nothing wrong with taking a moment to celebrate. Hiroki then explained that one of their party members had collapsed in the dungeon, and the other adventurers immediately understood and acknowledged that Hiroki must be worried about that. Hiroki then turned and thanked the large man who had stepped in to stop the confrontation earlier. The man brushed it off, saying it was simply part of his responsibilities, and wished them well. Lusha also thanked Hiroki as they left. Hiroki told her he was just relieved that she had not been hurt. Meanwhile, back at the Falling Star Inn, Lusha lay quietly with Hiroki's name drifting through her thoughts. She found herself wanting them all to grow stronger together. She wondered to herself at what point Hiroki had become so important to her. In her mind, she saw an image of Hiroki waving at Tina, and Tina running toward him and begging him to wait, not wanting to be separated from someone she cared so much about. Tina regained consciousness to find herself reaching weakly toward the ceiling. Dea gently took her hand. Both Dea and Floyd were seated beside her bed. Tina looked around, trying to get her bearings. Dea told her they were at the inn and gently reminded her that she had collapsed from magic exhaustion, asking if she remembered. Tina said she did, and then the full weight of reality came back to her as she realized that the conversation about Hiroki leaving the party had not been a dream. Dea looked at her with visible concern. Tina broke down in tears, saying she was the worst. She apologized to them both, feeling awful that she had pushed herself until she collapsed and ended up causing trouble for everyone around her. She worried that Hiroki must be completely fed up with her for putting him in that kind of situation. Dea told her not to worry, assuring her that Hiroki was not the type of person to feel that way about her. Floyd then spoke quietly, pointing out that Tina had been struggling with the fear of being separated from Hiroki. He told her gently that a person cannot always continue living the same life alongside everyone who matters to them, and that what was important was to be grateful and to reflect on how much she had changed and grown during the time they'd spent together. Tina repeated his words softly to herself, asking whether he meant being thankful for having met each other. Floyd said yes. That was exactly what he meant. Tina took that in and told herself she could not keep dwelling in sadness over it. She thought of Hiroki and quietly reaffirmed her promise to become stronger. She then noticed that the two of them had clearly been awake through the night, watching over her, and she apologized sincerely for making them worry and thanked them both from the heart. Dea still looked troubled. Floyd told Tina not to give another thought and asked her how she was feeling. She said she felt better. Floyd was relieved to hear it. He told her there was still some time before sunrise and encouraged her to get more rest and told Dea to do the same. Tina thanked Dea. He told her not to do anything reckless like that again. She agreed and apologized once more. Dea wished her good night and told her he would see her in the morning. The following morning, Tina came downstairs and found Hiroki already there. Hiroki said he was glad to see her looking better. Tina apologized for all the trouble she had caused. Hiroki told her it was all right and that she just needed to be more careful going forward. Tina called out to him with some emotion and asked that even after he left the party, he would not forget about them. Hiroki assured her that he never would. He told her how genuinely glad he was to have met her in this world and that he was truly grateful for it. He told her she would be in his thoughts. Tina's eyes filled with tears again. Hiroki asked where Floyd and Dea were. Tina told him they were still asleep, having stayed up late out of worry for her, with Dea being especially concerned. The woman who ran the inn noticed that Tina was up and told her to take a seat while she got breakfast ready. Tina said she had a small request. She told the woman that it was a little selfish of her to ask, but as a way of showing her gratitude for everything the night before, she wanted to know if she could be the one to make breakfast for Floyd and Dea instead. The woman was touched and said it was a very thoughtful thing to want to do and agreed to help guide her through it. Tina thanked her with warmth. Lusha, listening nearby, murmured quietly to herself about what it would mean to have a meal made by Tina's own hands. Hiroki said with a smile that those two would absolutely be pleased by it. Lusha then asked Hiroki where he was heading. He told her he was going to the guild to try to find information about how to reach the demon continent. Tina asked him quietly whether that meant he would be leaving the party starting from that day. Hiroki gently told her it would not be today, that he would still be staying with them that night. He also reminded her that once he found the apricot grass, he would return to them. He apologized again for leaving so soon after they had welcomed him in. Tina told him not to feel that way about it all and said there was nothing to apologize for. She told him sincerely that she hoped he would find the apricot grass quickly. Hiroki agreed and thanked her. In his own mind, he was resolute. He had to do absolutely whatever it took to lift the curse from Rin. The heroes had been bound by the king through a completely one-sided contract, and on top of that, Rin had been struck by a deadly curse cast by a demon. Hiroki was firmly determined that he would not let things in the way the king intended. Lusha had been watching Hiroki quietly throughout all of this. She called out to him and asked whether he would be willing to take her along as his partner. Hiroki's eyes went wide. His mind went completely blank for a moment as he wondered, with some flustered confusion, whether she was confessing her feelings for him. Lusha asked once more whether Hiroki would accept her as his partner for the journey. Hiroki acknowledged her proposal, but pointed out that the demon continent was an extremely dangerous place. Lusha argued that she could only make proper use of her attacks when she was around him. Hiroki thought about this honestly. She was right. Lusha had tremendous firepower, and with him beside her, the problem of friendly fire simply did not exist. The kind of partner he had been looking for was standing right in front of him, and yet he hesitated. He told her that while he was genuinely glad she had proposed it, she was already a member of Floyd's party, and he could not make that kind of decision on his own without involving the others. At that moment, Floyd came down the stairs and told Hiroki not to worry about that. Hiroki was surprised to see him already up. Floyd said plainly that it made sense, pointing out that Lusha was clearly a better fit alongside Hiroki than she was with the rest of them. Hearing that, Tina looked quietly crestfallen. Floyd continued, adding that if Hiroki accepted Lusha's offer, he would be able to leave the city much sooner than planned. He suggested that there was no way of knowing unless they tried, and proposed that they go to a dungeon together to test it out. He mentioned that the monsters in the deeper levels of the Morifukaki dungeon were said to be comparable in strength to those found on the demon continent. Hiroki said he was open to the idea, as long as Lusha was willing. Lusha said without hesitation that she was, and that she would give it everything she had. Hiroki agreed, and said they would give a proper try. Floyd then said he was going to eat, and called out for the young lady. Tina quickly stepped forward and told Floyd to wait just a moment before heading back out to let Lusha and Hiroki know to do their best together as a party, and that she would be cheering the two of them on. Hiroki thanked her sincerely. Later that day, Hiroki and Lusha made their way to the carriage boarding area. Lusha explained that taking a carriage was the way to reach the Morifukaki dungeon. When they climbed inside, Hiroki was struck by how large it was and looked around with curiosity. He noticed a man nearby with a bag full of arrows, and it got him thinking. He asked Lusha how she produced her arrows. Lusha explained that she created them using a special ring, and she showed him a bangle-like item, explaining that her skill called Create Arrow generated the arrows for her, and that the number she could produce depended on the rarity of the ring she was using. Hiroki remarked that the material must be something very precious if it allowed her to make as many arrows as she pleased, and asked with amazement whether it was made of orichalcum or adamantite. Lusha apologized and said she did not actually know the name of the material. Hiroki said that was fine and simply noted how incredibly convenient the item was. Lusha giggled. She thanked Hiroki for finally solving a mystery she had been wondering about. She told him that since they were now partners, she would continue fighting at full strength. Hiroki felt his face go a little red. When they arrived at their destination, Lusha told him that the dungeon was about 30 minutes away from where they had gotten off. She also mentioned that the map of the Morifukaki dungeon was only fully charted down to the 15th floor. Hiroki asked whether the 15th floor was the lowest level. Lusha clarified that it was simply the deepest point that adventurers had cleared and mapped so far, and that it would be fun to see how far beyond that the two of them could go. Hiroki agreed that it sounded like a good challenge. They soon arrived at the entrance to the dungeon. An old man who had set up camp outside greeted them, and asked if it was their first time visiting and whether they would like a map. Hiroki said yes, and the old man handed one over. Lusha also took the opportunity to purchase some cooking supplies from the man, impressed by how much he had available for sale. Hiroki then asked the old man whether he had any item that would attract monsters specifically to himself. Lusha asked curiously why he would want such a thing. Hiroki explained that it was so she would not get targeted by the monsters, and so that by drawing them all to himself, he could make it much easier for her arrows to find their marks. The old man confirmed that he did have something like that, and handed Hiroki a small potion, explaining that it was a monster-attracting potion that would pull all nearby monsters toward whoever drank it. One bottle was priced at 2,000 lot. Hiroki winced a little at the cost. The old man added that the effect of one bottle lasted for about 3 hours. After thinking it over, Hiroki decided to take 3 bottles. He let out a small sigh and reminded himself that this was simply the cost of adventuring, and that they would gather plenty of materials to make up for it. Hiroki opened one of the bottles and drank it down. He coughed from the taste, and Lusha asked with concern if he was all right. Hiroki said he was fine, reasoning to himself that if the potion was going to draw monsters straight to him, then the price was more than worth it. He then activated his shield skill, and the two of them entered the dungeon. They found themselves on the first basement floor, and Hiroki immediately noticed how crowded it was with adventurers. Lusha agreed. Hiroki said they should push forward at a steady pace, and Lusha agreed. By the time they reached the 6th basement floor, the environment had changed completely, and Hiroki was struck by how much it resembled the inside of a dense forest. Then a killer moth appeared before them, and the mood between the two of them dropped immediately. Before long, more and more moths began swarming toward Hiroki, drawn in by the potion. Hiroki asked Lusha, with some exasperation, whether she did not hate him a little for getting her into this situation. Lusha fired rapidly and frantically at the swarm surrounding him. Hiroki told her to keep moving and that they should walk while fighting so they could get out of that area more quickly. Lusha agreed and kept shooting as they moved, managing to hit the moths steadily as they went. Hiroki moved to pick up the materials dropped by the fallen moths, while Lusha continued firing without stopping. By the time they reached the stairway leading down to the 7th basement floor, the moths could no longer follow them, and the swarm fell away. Hiroki remarked with exhaustion that it was no surprise they had worn out, given how overwhelming the numbers had been. Lusha acknowledged Hiroki's performance positively, though she appeared distracted by the large number of skills around them, and seemed to brush it off. Hiroki noticed something was off with her, and checked on her well-being, wondering if she held any negative feelings toward him. She clarified that her unease had nothing to do with him personally, but rather came from her discomfort with the moths in the area. Hiroki then called for a short break, and offered Lusha some water. She accepted it, letting him drink first. While resting, Hiroki ran through the situation in his mind. It had taken them roughly an hour to reach where they were, and he knew things would only get more difficult the deeper they went. He calculated that their first potion would likely run out around the 15th floor. The real challenge was figuring out exactly how deep the dungeon went. His plan was to push as far as possible using their 2 potions and then warp back out. He was grateful Lusha had let him drink first. After he finished, Lusha grabbed the water and drank from it eagerly. Hiroki continued thinking through their situation. They had never actually confirmed whether 3 potions would be enough for a one-way trip. For the time being, he decided they would see how far they could manage on 1.5 potions. Reaching the boss chamber with the remaining 1.5 potions felt like a gamble. He wanted the 2 of them to attempt taking down the boss, but part of him was beginning to wonder if they should just give up for the day. He was also considering whether turning back without a fight would require him to focus heavily on maintaining Lusha's shield. His thoughts were interrupted when Lusha spoke up. She reminded him that even though their partnership was only a trial arrangement, they were still partners, and she wanted him to include her in any decisions rather than carrying the burden alone. Hiroki immediately recognized she was right and admitted it openly. There was no point in thinking through everything by himself. Lusha then urged them to move forward with renewed energy. She expressed her belief that together with Hiroki, they could make it, not just through the dungeon, but all the way to the magic continent as well. Her words genuinely moved him, and seeing her smile only added to that feeling. With that, Hiroki's resolve was restored, and they set their sights firmly on reaching the lowest floor. They pushed on and eventually arrived at the 16th floor below ground. Lusha was visibly amazed to find themselves in uncharted territory. Hiroki decided to use their second potion right there. No sooner had he done so than a powerful enemy appeared. Lusha noted that larger monsters were easier for her to aim at, and she took it down. They continued pressing forward until they reached the 20th floor, where Hiroki realized the second potion's effects were nearly spent. He decided they should avoid combat and run straight for the stairway. They found the stairway leading down to the 21st floor, and Lusha was struck by how beautiful it was. The stairs had a shimmering quality, and she wondered aloud if they were made of amber. Hiroki felt a growing sense that the lowest floor might be close. Lusha shared the same feeling. Since the potion was also running low, Hiroki suggested they take a longer rest there, and Lusha agreed. They pulled out dried meat and sandwiches from their bags. Lusha checked on Hiroki, asking if exhaustion was getting to him. He assured her he was fine and pointed out that the strain must have been greater on her, since she had been the one attacking the whole time. She waved it off and said that rather than feeling tired, she actually found it exciting to know she was capable of fighting. She felt full of energy, she said, and then immediately let out a yawn. Hiroki noticed and asked if she was sleepy. She admitted she was a little, as it had been a long time since she had fought so intensely. She suggested they rest for the night. Hiroki agreed, though he noted they had no sleeping bags. He began to think that a place like this might seem uncomfortable, especially for her. But before he could finish the thought, she cut in and pointed out that sleeping in dungeon stairways was simply a normal part of an adventurer's life. Hiroki reflected that he had stayed up all night playing games before, so if anything, he was the one who was less accustomed to roughing it. Then, without warning, Lusha's head drooped and came to rest on his shoulder. He thought about how much effort she had put in and understood completely why she was worn out. He quietly thanked her for giving everything she had and wished her a good night. He reminded himself that traveling with Lusha felt genuinely promising, and he was confident they would reach the magic continent together. He sat with that thought for a while, reflecting on the weight of responsibility he felt for the situation they were in, and without realizing it, he too drifted off to sleep. When morning came, Lusha woke up brimming with enthusiasm, declaring it a perfect day to take on the dungeon boss. Hiroki was a little surprised by how lively she was given the conditions they had slept in. He realized he had fallen asleep before he even noticed. Lusha commented on how wonderful the floor around them looked. Hiroki cast his shield to protect them both, and Lusha thanked him. He then drank their potion, and Lusha remarked that it did not look unpleasant at all. Almost immediately after, a black dog appeared and launched an attack directly at Hiroki. To his surprise, the attack actually connected and hit him. Lusha reacted quickly and took aim. Hiroki told her to stay calm, reminding her that his shield was active, and then encouraged her to fire freely, noting that she was his partner. Lusha steadied herself and unleashed a barrage of arrows, firing 5 at the same time. Hiroki was stunned by that. Lusha explained that releasing them all at once saved time. She also mentioned she was surprised the monster had managed to land a hit on him. After the fight, Hiroki collected the materials and acknowledged that his evasion stat clearly was not strong enough yet. Lusha then spotted a stone nearby and recognized it as something rare, a magic stone. She knew from experience that materials like that were quite difficult to come by for crafting equipment. Hiroki was delighted by the find. He suggested they move ahead and draw out more monsters, and Lusha was on board. After eventually defeating the black dog, they pressed forward and spotted a door in the distance. The atmosphere around it gave Hiroki a strong feeling that it was the boss chamber. Lusha felt her nerves tighten. They crept close enough to take a look inside, and what they saw stopped them cold. It was a Cerberus. Hiroki's mind raced. The Cerberus was the kind of creature that appeared as a final boss in video games, so finding one here, at this point in the dungeon, was the last thing he had expected.